Chapter 905, Plant and Vegetation Throwdown. Alchemist Lodge Peak 7191 was now surrounded by tens of thousands of apprentice alchemists, all of whom were staring fixedly at Meng Hao and Fang Zhejiang on the platform. It was especially interesting that there was a wager between the two of them, and the apprentice alchemists couldn't wait to see what happened. Many could read between the lines, and knew that Fang Zhejiang had intentionally come here to stir up trouble with Meng Hao. However, considering that it didn't affect them personally, those people were even more excited than the others. They wanted to see who exactly was better when it came to knowledge of plants and vegetation. If Meng Hao hadn't just given a 3-day lecture on the subject, the apprentice alchemists would not have hesitated even a moment to say that Fang Zhejiang would prevail. Now, however, it was hard to say. Meng Hao looked extremely bashful as he embarrassedly scanned Fang Zhejiang's bag of holding with divine sense. Then he licked his lips and looked back over at Fang Zhejiang. He felt luckier with every minute that passed. He had never imagined that, having only been in the Tao of Alchemy division for a few days, there would already be someone who came looking to deliver up spirit stones. When he realized what he was thinking, he suddenly felt a bit more embarrassed. Seeing all the eyes focused on him, Fang Zhejiang snorted coldly. He had been immersed in the Tao of Alchemy for many years, and was highly proficient when it came to skill with plants and vegetation. As the saying went, his proverbial pill furnace glowed with the bright green of perfection. Actually, he was already qualified to be promoted to a Tier 3 alchemist, and as such, was absolutely confident in being able to win the bet. Were it not for the fact that he was badly in need of alchemy resources, he would never have come here. After all, participating in something like this was really beneath his status. His expression proud and lofty, Fang Zhejiang raised his hand high and then smacked his bag of holding. Instantly, a medicinal plant appeared in his hand. It was green and looked no different from an ordinary blade of grass. He waved his hand, sending it flying through the air to hover in front of Meng Hao. "I won't make things hard for you," he said coolly. "I'll show you 3 medicinal plants. You simply have to tell me their names and properties. This is the first one." From his perspective, this plant in and of itself was enough to stump his opponent. He planned to show this Fang Hao the height of the heavens and the depths of the earth. He would help Fang Hao to know exactly how vastly separated the two of them were in terms of qualifications. As a Tier 2 alchemist, he wanted to ensure a quick victory. Considering his status in the Tao of Alchemy division, knocking his opponent out of the competition with a single blow would be the most suitable result. Fang Zhejiang smiled coldly, swished his sleeve, then clasped his hands behind his back and looked arrogantly at Meng Hao. Forget about this guy, he thought. Not even a Tier 1 alchemist would recognize this medicinal plant. Meng Hao was smiling, just as before as he looked at the medicinal plant. All of the apprentice alchemists were also staring at it, trying to guess what it was. The Tier 1 alchemists in the area were also digging through their memories, and yet none of them could recall even the slightest scrap of information about a plant like this. Immediately, a buzz of conversation rose up. "This can't be right. That medicinal plant doesn't look special at all. It doesn't even look like a medicinal plant. Is it just an ordinary plant from the mortal world? I might not have incredible skill when it comes to plants and vegetation, but I know a bit. However, this plant is something I've never seen before. He definitely deserves to be a Tier 2 alchemist." He pulled out a medicinal plant that nobody even recognizes. Fang Zhejiang looked haughtily over at Meng Hao. "If you don't recognize it, then kneel upon this mountain peak for 3 days and then screw off." Almost as soon as the words left his mouth, however, Meng Hao suddenly looked up at him and chuckled. "Alchemist Fang, I never imagined that you would actually possess this type of wind spirit grass. Such a plant is useless for medicinal purposes. However, when struck by a strong wind, it will blossom with a spirit flower. That flower can bloom with up to 7 colors, with 7 being the optimal number. That medicinal flower is one of the most important ingredients used when concocting wind-type medicinal pills. Unfortunately, Alchemist Fang, this particular plant of yours has a lot of imperfections. It will only produce a 3-colored flower." Meng Hao's words left the surrounding apprentice alchemists in shock. Even the Tier 1 alchemists were astonished. They had never even heard of wind spirit grass, although many knew of wind spirit flower. At this point, they suddenly had an epiphany and realized the origin of wind spirit flowers. It was at this point that Meng Hao blew onto the blade of grass. Because of the level of his cultivation base, that breath was like a gale force wind. A rumbling sound filled the area, and then the blade of grass began to wriggle and sway back and forth. Everyone watched as a three-colored flower bloomed at the tip of the blade, and a medicinal aroma filled the area. It really has three colors. Fang Hao's skill with plants and vegetation is astonishing after all. He didn't just recognize that plant, he was able to judge its nature entirely. The surrounding crowds were in an uproar. The Tier 1 alchemists were now looking at Meng Hao with complete and utter respect. In the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division, powerful alchemists were treated with fervor and veneration. Fang Zhejiang's eyes widened, then he stared dead at Meng Hao, and a serious look spread out across his face. The wind spirit grass might seem like an ordinary medicinal plant, but it was actually a line of demarcation when it came to determining skill with plants and vegetation. Even many Tier 2 alchemists wouldn't know much about it. Even more shocking to him was how his opponent had identified how many colors the flower would bloom in. That was something that only Tier 3 alchemists should be able to do. So this guy has some skill after all, he thought. It seems I need to take things a bit more seriously. Fang Zhejiang waved his hand to pull the wind spirit grass back into his bag of holding, from which he then produced another medicinal plant. This plant had more than 100 leaves, which formed the shape of a triangle. The stamen of the plant's flowers were long and almost looked like tentacles as they drifted back and forth. A single look at this medicinal plant, and it was clear that it was beyond ordinary. Everyone looking at it also felt a faint sense of danger. In order to avoid any accusations of bullying, said Fang Zhejiang, I will not require you to explain the properties of this plant. Merely telling me its name will suffice. He stared icily at Meng Hao. Although he didn't say anything further inside, he was laughing coldly. In his opinion, he had underestimated his opponent a bit when it came to the first medicinal plant. However, with this second one, he was completely confident that he could secure victory. When I first got this medicinal plant, he thought, I didn't have any idea what it was. It was personally grown by one of the Tier 5 alchemists, and I had to spend a small fortune to acquire it. It's completely one of a kind. Not a single manual of plants and vegetation will contain a description of it. It was grafted together from a variety of other medicinal plants, using the top-secret technique of a Tier 5 alchemist. I simply can't believe that an inconsequential apprentice alchemist will be able to identify it. Smiling coldly, Fan Zhejiang lifted his chin and stood there, hands clasped behind his back as he looked at Meng Hao. He could visualize his opponent with tears streaming down his cheeks, racking his brains as he tried to identify the plant. He would probably spout a bunch of nonsense, for which Fan Zhejiang had already prepared appropriate words of response. Everything was completely quiet. All eyes were focused on the medicinal plant. Because of the vague sense of danger it emanated, everyone was now paying close attention to it. Gradually, the medicinal aroma wafting out from the plant vitalized the minds of all present. What medicinal plant is that? I'm pretty sure I've never seen it before, although something about it seems familiar. How strange. Even the Tier 1 alchemists were all frowning and trying desperately to recall what this plant was. Some people even pulled out jade slips containing information about plants and vegetation, which they began to search through for clues. That plant is even more mysterious than the wind spirit grass from before. As the members of the audience began to speculate further about the plant, Meng Hao looked at it, and his eyes began to shine. I never imagined that the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division would be so skilled with plants and vegetation, he said. Immediately, the audience went silent, and everyone looked at Meng Hao. Fang Zhejiang laughed coldly. Can you identify it or not? There's no need to be deliberately cryptic. Meng Hao chuckled in response. This medicinal plant is something I doubt you could grow, he said. When the onlookers heard this, they didn't think too much of it. However, Fang Zhejiang's heart began to thump. It has no name, Meng Hao continued slowly. Or perhaps you could say, the only person qualified to name it is the alchemist who created it. When Fan Zhejiang heard this, his face flickered. Meng Hao's two sentences were like lightning bolts striking his brain. How could he ever have imagined that his opponent would be able to pick up on the clues with just a glance? He quickly prepared to retrieve the plant and put it away, since Meng Hao's first two sentences had already revealed the truth regarding the name of the plant. He recalled how the first time he had ever laid eyes on this plant years ago, he had stared in shock. To him, it had seemed like some strange and miraculous item. It wasn't until the Tier 5 alchemist explained the plant to him that he understood the truth and prostrated himself in admiration. Just how skilled is this Fang Hao, he thought. He actually recognized the plant. Damn it. No, I really have to pull a fast one. Feeling more on guard than ever, he immediately had the urge to slander his opponent. However, in the Tao of Alchemy division, reputation was extremely important, and with so many people looking on, word would spread quickly. Fang Zhejiang gritted his teeth, and was just about to retrieve the medicinal plant and put it away when suddenly, Meng Hao started talking again. This is a medicinal plant produced by a grafting technique. Let me see. It seems to be grafted from 19 different medicinal plants. Those 19 plants consist of watershed root, spirit dream grass, Mount Heaven leaf, mortality bloom. Meng Hao calmly listed all 19 varieties of plants. Fang Zhejiang's eyes widened, and he began to pant. He subconsciously staggered backward several steps, his expression one of disbelief. As for the next plant he had planned to pull out, Meng Hao had just mentioned it in the list he had rattled off, so Fang Zhejiang had no choice but to abandon any idea of using it. How could he have ever imagined that this person could possibly name all of the plants that made up the graft? Fang Zhejiang's mind was spinning. Of course, he couldn't be absolutely certain as to whether what Meng Hao had said was completely correct or not, because only the Tier 5 alchemist who created it would be able to verify it. After all, this was a top-secret technique. Eventually, Meng Hao reached his conclusion and said, "Afterwards, use the magic of the 4 seasons, invert yin and yang, graft 3 plants simultaneously. Combine all 19 medicinal plants, do not allow them to be touched by the sun, allow the yin qi to coalesce, which completes the process." Because this medical plant was created by grafting 19 other plants together, if it is used in pill concocting, there are many possible transformations. An ordinary alchemist would probably be incapable of using it to concoct anything at all. Presumably, the alchemist who gave you this medicinal plant also gave you a pill formula specifically designed to be used with it. Tell me, Alchemist Fang, am I correct? Meng Hao smiled and looked at Fang Zhejiang. Meng Hao's words were followed by deathly silence. Everyone was looking at Fang Zhejiang, whose face flickered back and forth between various emotions. He felt like lightning was crashing around in his head, and without realizing it, he stepped backward. He was now looking at Meng Hao with wide eyes, as if he were some type of evil spirit. Chapter 906, The First Waves. Impossible, this is impossible. Fang Zhejiang's heart trembled violently. He had no idea how the medicinal plant had been grafted together, and no way of knowing whether Meng Hao was correct or not. However, based on his skill in the Tao of Alchemy, he was fairly certain that what Meng Hao had said was true. Most importantly, the Tier 5 alchemist from whom he had acquired this medicinal plant had indeed given him a pill formula to use with it. Furthermore, the words that alchemist had used to describe the plant were exactly the same as the words Meng Hao had uttered just now. You! The surrounding apprentice alchemists noticed Fang Zhejiang's pale face, the fact that he had backed up, and his facial expression. Virtually all of them understood exactly what it meant. Meng Hao had been completely correct in what he had said. There was no other reason for Fang Zhejiang's expression to change the way it had. Fang Hao was right again. Not even alchemist Fang Zhejiang is capable of outdoing Fang Hao when it comes to plants and vegetation. It's a good thing I kept good notes from when Fang Hao was lecturing about plants and vegetation earlier. I'm going to go back and review them thoroughly. The surrounding apprentice alchemists were abuzz. After all, as mere apprentice alchemists, they didn't really understand much about alchemy. Even the Tier 1 alchemists were panting and looking on with wide eyes. Then they exchanged glances and saw similar looks of disbelief on each other's faces. They were alchemists, and though they might only be Tier 1, their knowledge base far exceeded that of apprentice alchemists. Since they couldn't identify the medicinal plant Fang Zhejiang held in his hand, they initially hadn't felt that there was anything special about it. However, after Meng Hao spoke, and especially after he revealed the grafting technique, their minds trembled. That grafting technique is a top-secret method of a Tier 5 alchemist. 19 medicinal plants. I'm afraid only a Tier 5 alchemist could create something like that. But Fang Hao is so inhuman that he actually easily identified the grafting method by simply looking at the plant. Just what is the full extent of his skill in plants and vegetation, and his Tao of alchemy? How frightening. It's almost like no secrets that relate to plants and vegetation can be kept from him. Because of their advanced understanding, the Tier 1 alchemists were thoroughly astonished. Fang Zhejiang's face was pale white as he looked at Meng Hao, who in his view had become completely inscrutable and terrifying. He could never have predicted that anyone would be able, with a single look, to see through an alchemist's top-secret technique and reveal the grafting method. To him, such a thing was vastly terrifying. As of this moment, He knew that he was absolutely no match for Fang Hao when it came to skill in plants and vegetation. He simply didn't stand a chance of winning when up against an inhuman like this in a competition. Damn you, Fang Yuni, he thought. You just wait until I get back. I'll teach you a thing or two. Fang Zhejiang was filled with bitterness as well as a sudden, bone-deep hatred of Fang Yuni. As for Meng Hao, he didn't dare to hate him. Because the Tao of Alchemy division had its own way of doing things, he could ignore the fact that Meng Hao was chosen. However, after getting a sense of Meng Hao's skill with plants and vegetation, he was frightened to death. With skill like that, he thought, even if he's not very good at pill concocting, he'll still rise to complete prominence. Furthermore, what if he's just as gifted in pill concocting? That would be petrifying. He'll certainly exceed me in the Tao of Alchemy division. Now, thanks to Fang Yuni, I've offended him. It definitely wasn't worth it. Fang Zhejiang took a deep breath, gritted his teeth, and was just about to admit defeat when suddenly his heart quivered. He suddenly realized that this defeat could actually be turned into an opportunity. He hesitated for a moment, then clasped hands and bowed to Meng Hao. Alchemist Fang, your skill in plants and vegetation is profound. I'm no match for you. I was crude and rash earlier, and I hope you can look past that. Please take the spirit stones in that bag of holding as my gift to you upon our first meeting. I admit defeat. His words sent the apprentice alchemists into an uproar. However, the Tier 1 alchemists had already surmised that he would take such action. There would obviously be something wrong with any of them, who would still feel confident enough to continue even when faced with someone so inhuman as to be able to identify a top-secret grafting technique. However, I would also like to ask for some pointers if that's okay. I saw a medicinal plant a while back. I've asked many people about it, but no one can tell me exactly what it was. Fang Zhejiang once again clasped hands and bowed. Alchemist Fang, if you can help me out a bit, I'd be more than happy to give this grafted medicinal plant to you as an expression of my thanks. Meng Hao's expression was as calm as ever. However, inwardly he sighed, thinking that he should have acted a bit weaker earlier. Showing off so much had only deprived him of a chance to fleece this fat sheep. It's too bad, he thought. I have a lot more spirit stones in my bag of holding, and I was planning to con this guy even harder. Now I've lost the chance. Feeling a bit depressed, he waved his hand to collect Fang Zhejiang's bag of holding. After scanning it with divine sense and seeing how many spirit stones were inside, he felt a bit better. Then he looked up at the grafted medicinal plant. He knew that the value of such a plant would be significant. Besides, the grafting techniques that had been used were intriguing. As a result, he nodded to Fang Zhejiang. Fang Zhejiang's expression brightened, and he immediately produced a jade slip from his bag of holding, which he respectfully handed over to Meng Hao, who accepted it and scanned it with divine sense. Immediately, an image of a violet flower appeared in his mind, growing on top of a tiny, hand-sized horse, which was galloping at top speed. That was all he saw before the image vanished. Meng Hao's expression became more serious, and he scanned the jade slip again. After a moment of thought, he asked, "Where did you see this?" "On an island in a sea district here on planet East Victory. I just randomly happened to see it, and chased after it for a while to no avail. I asked some of the local fishermen about it, and all of them reported seeing it before on occasion. However, even after returning to the location on a few times, I was never able to find it again." Fang Zhejiang had shown this jade to slip to numerous alchemists, but none of them had ever been able to identify it. The best he had gotten were speculations that it was some type of rare medicinal plant. "I think that horse is actually the root of the medicinal plant," said Fang Zhejiang. "You would be wrong," said Meng Hao, shaking his head. "That's not a medicinal plant, it's a medicinal pill, a sentient medicinal pill." "What?" exclaimed Fang Zhejiang, feeling both shock and disbelief. None of the numerous alchemists he had asked about this image had ever come to the conclusion that it was a medicinal pill. No matter how you looked at it, the only answer that made sense was that it was some kind of medicinal plant. "How is that even possible?" said Fang Zhejiang, mostly to himself. "Medicinal pills are medicinal pills. They're concocted by people. How could a medicinal pill come to life?" "Such things do exist," said Meng Hao. "I've seen them." Without providing any further explanation, he handed the jade slip back to Fang Zhejiang, then clasped hands and bowed to the crowd. Finally, he turned and left. Even after Meng Hao left, Fang Zhejiang was still in a state of disbelief. The surrounding apprentice alchemists all began to disperse excitedly. Soon after, Fang Zhejiang returned to his residence, whereupon he took out Fang Yuni's jade slip and then grimly transmitted a stream of divine will into it. Meanwhile, Fang Yuni was in the ancestral mansion, meditating in his residence as he waited for news from the Tao of Alchemy Division. Alchemist Fang Zhejiang is a Tier 2 alchemist. His skill in the Tao of Alchemy is incredible. Once he shows up, that Meng Hao will definitely get put in his place. Forcing him to kneel there for 3 days will definitely lighten my heart a bit. He chuckled coldly, and he felt incredible anticipation for the moment when he could visit the Tao of Alchemy Division and personally look at Meng Hao kneeling there. Your dad was there on planet South Heaven, and that's why you could be so arrogant and despotic. But here, you're an outsider. Let's see you try to be pompous here. A wide smile appeared on his face. It was at this point that his expression flickered as he produced a jade slip from his bag of holding. Then he laughed out loud. Alchemist Fang sent me a message. His expression one of anticipation. He sent his divine sense into the jade slip. After a moment, the jade slip began to glow, and an illusory version of Fang Zhejiang's face appeared. His expression was grim. As soon as he saw Fang Zhejiang's expression, Fang Yuni gaped in shock. Before he could even say anything, Fang Zhejiang had already begun to speak. Fang Yuni, what enmity is there between us? You set me up, you bastard. You wanted me to humiliate Fang Hao. His skill in plants and vegetation is inhuman. Fang Yuni, I'm not going to forget the trouble you've caused me. Fang Yuni's face fell. Alchemist Fang this. Don't call me Alchemist Fang. From this day forth, when you want pills concocted, don't come looking for me. Furthermore, none of my alchemist friends will concoct for you either. Fang Yuni, what you've done is far too excessive. Fang Zhejiang glared at Fang Yuni for a moment, then gave a cold snort and severed the divine will connection. Fang Yuni's face flickered with various emotions, and then suddenly he shot to his feet and pulled out another jade slip, which he used to connect with the apprentice alchemist he had sent away earlier. After finding out what had happened between Meng Hao and Fang Zhejiang in the Tao of Alchemy Division, his face darkened. He wrathfully smashed the jade slip, and his face twisted with rage. Meng Hao, he howled, and his hatred for Meng Hao grew even more intense. In the Tao of Alchemy Division, everyone watched Meng Hao leave, and then dispersed. It didn't take long before Meng Hao's name began to be spread by all of the apprentice alchemists who had been present. The story of the bet between Meng Hao and Fang Zhejiang was especially popular. When the apprentice alchemists from the outer mountains learned that Meng Hao had actually defeated Fang Zhejiang in terms of plants and vegetation, it only made Meng Hao all the more mysterious, and the subject of even more debate. He had a 30,000-meter bloodline gatebeam. He had experienced the 7th-year tribulation, was the eldest grandson of the direct bloodline, and was a chosen of the Fang clan. Word of all of these things spread, and soon, Meng Hao's name began to rise to prominence among the apprentice alchemists. There were even some low-level alchemists who took note. In the ancestral mansion, Fang Wei's father and grandfather sat in a temple, their faces grim as they listened to a Tier 1 alchemist retell the story of what had happened that day, the Tao of Alchemy Division. After a long moment, the Tier 1 alchemist left. Fang Wei's father, Fang Zhixian, looked incredibly gloomy. Dad, if that son of a bitch keeps doing things like this, it's going to cause waves of disturbance. It doesn't matter, the old man said somberly. He won't live much longer. Besides, even if he becomes famous in the Tao of Alchemy Division, the rules of the Fang clan are clear. Anyone who practices cultivation must contribute merit points. He just arrived, and will be provided with a set monthly allowance of merit points. It doesn't matter if it's in terms of cultivation or pill concocting, he won't be making any waves. Besides, if he wants to earn more merit points, he'll have to accomplish tasks set forth by the clan. When that happens, it doesn't matter if he's avoided death so far, he'll be on the outside, where accidents can happen at any time. Chapter 907, I definitely don't want it. Meng Hao had returned to his Immortal's Cave residence. He already had some idea as to what would be happening right now back in the Tao of Alchemy Division, and some of those things were exactly what he wanted. My cultivation base isn't good enough to help me rise to prominence in the Fang clan, but since they have their own Tao of Alchemy, why not rise to prominence there? That can make me just as popular and famous. The higher my status in their Tao of Alchemy Division, then the higher my status will be in the clan in general. The Tao of Alchemy. If I could become the most powerful alchemist in the Fang clan, then I would definitely be super famous. When I control the entire Tao of Alchemy Division, then finding out what happened to my 2 Nirvana fruits won't be very difficult. His eyes gleamed, and a cold smile appeared on his face. After a moment, Meng Hao closed his eyes and rotated his cultivation base, as well as his immortal meridian. The portion of it which remained illusory was slowly becoming solid. I still need more time before my immortal meridian is full and complete. When that happens, I'll be a true immortal. He took a deep breath. Outside, it was gradually growing dark, and the moon had risen. Meng Hao's eyes finally opened, and he waved his hand, causing the 10 sets of ingredients for spirit elixir to emerge. Meng Hao looked them over carefully, then examined the formula for a while. This formula is pretty simple, he thought. Also, the spirit elixir it produces won't be very high quality. Eyes glittering, he produced the jade box and took out the nirvana fruits. After examining them for a bit, he tried his hand at concocting the spirit elixir. First, he made one batch using the method described in the formula. To Meng Hao, that method was simply too basic. After concocting the first batch, he decided to use his own method. He altered the formula a bit, then produced a total of 9 batches of spirit elixir, each one slightly different than the others. Then he carefully dripped them onto one of the nirvana fruits one batch at a time, and observed the various reactions. He was immediately able to see signs of restoration on the fruit. By the time the 9th batch of spirit elixir had been absorbed, the nirvana fruit was no longer cracked and wrinkled, and in fact looked wholly recovered. It even emanated a splendorous light that strongly stimulated the blood in Meng Hao's veins. He even had the mistaken feeling that he should immediately absorb the nirvana fruit into his body. He quickly closed his eyes and suppressed the impulse to try it out. After 4 hours, the nirvana fruit slowly began to wither back up. By the time 6 hours had passed, it had returned to its original dried-up shape. If I had actually tried to absorb it, he murmured, looking at the withered fruits, then I would have been turned into a desiccated corpse just now, a sudden and unexpected death. If I want to absorb these nirvana fruits, then I need to truly restore them so that they aren't dangerous. Of these 9 batches of spirit extract, the 7th was the strongest. It was around twice as strong as any of the others. He looked down at the final remaining set of ingredients. After a moment of hesitation, a gleam of determination appeared in his eyes. This formula still isn't good enough. The medicinal plants used to concoct the spirit elixir can actually be substituted with other medicinal plants. Meng Hao sank into contemplation regarding the combination of medicinal plants. After enough time passed for an incense stick to burn, he gritted his teeth and pulled out a sun blossom and a reincarnation leaf, legendary medicinal plants that were extinct in the outside world. After adding them to the formula, he began to concoct more spirit elixir. This time, it took him 2 full days to complete the concoction. When the medicinal plants were finally refined into a liquid, he ended up with a glob of emerald green fluid about the size of a fist, which he then placed into a small bottle. It was filled with dense immortal qi, and because it contained sun blossom and reincarnation leaf, it meant that this bottle was shocking in terms of both quality and value. Enduring the pain in his heart, Meng Hao produced the copper mirror and duplicated it, then very carefully poured a single drop from the bottle onto one of the nirvana fruits. It instantly returned to life and began to glow with scintillating light. However, Meng Hao knew that the fruit had not truly recovered. He continued to pour 1 drop after another onto the fruit, a total of 100. When the liquid was completely absorbed by the nirvana fruit, it gradually began to transform. Although it was difficult to describe the exact nature of the transformation, Meng Hao was just barely able to detect some sort of life force from within. It's working, he thought, his eyes flickering. However, his heart then began to twinge with pain. Duplicating that single bottle of spirit elixir had removed a distressing amount of spirit stones from his bag of holding. He clenched his jaw. It's just a bit of money, right? He said through gritted teeth and then duplicated another bottle. Time passed, 5 days. Damn it, do you absorb spirit elixir or spirit stones? Why you're still absorbing the spirit elixir. It's like I've fallen into a bottomless pit. Arg my spirit stones. Meng Hao's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the nirvana fruit. During these 5 days, he had depleted the number of spirit stones in his bag of holding by half. He had duplicated an ocean of spirit elixir, all of which had been absorbed by the nirvana fruit. The life force inside of it was growing stronger, but there seemed to be no end in sight. Meng Hao could clearly sense that it was thirsty to absorb more spirit elixir. If you calculated exactly how much spirit elixir the nirvana fruit had absorbed, anyone in the Fang clan would have been shocked. Furthermore, that spirit elixir was of the finest quality. A few bottles might not have been a big deal, but for most people, it wouldn't just be a problem of spirit stones. they simply would never be able to gather that many medicinal plants, especially not the sun blossoms and reincarnation leaves. Only when it reaches the point that it can't absorb any more spirit elixir will I know that it's fully restored. Meng Hao's heart dripped with blood, and he ceased duplicating the spirit elixir. He quickly packed the nirvana fruit up and then closed his eyes. After a moment, he opened his eyes again and then frowned. This isn't the right method. I need to increase the spirit elixir's power. To do that, I need to replace all of the current medicinal plant ingredients. If I can create an even more powerful spirit elixir, that would be the best thing. Although it might cost more spirit stones to duplicate on an individual basis, overall, I'll be able to save a lot of resources. Meng Hao took a deep breath and then rose to his feet, ending the current madness of duplication and concoction. He was now preparing to make another trip to the Tao of Alchemy Division and figure out a way to get the medicinal plants he needed. Unfortunately, I don't have the clan merit points I need. However, that problem is solved easily enough. Eyes shining brightly, he turned into a beam of light that shot toward the Tao of Alchemy Division. People recognized him almost as soon as he arrived. That was especially true when he reached Alchemy Lodge Peak 7191. The apprentice alchemists there, including the old alchemist Fang Qun, immediately rose to their feet excitedly, clasped hands, and invited him onto the platform. Meng Hao didn't decline, but instead took his place and began to lecture about the Tao of Alchemy, and even asked the apprentice alchemists to go invite others to come listen. All of this is for the clan, Meng Hao announced in a profound voice. I hope that, even with my meager skills, I can help to advance our clan's Tao of Alchemy. His voice seemed to be full of loyalty and righteousness toward the clan. The apprentice alchemists were getting excited, and immediately took out Jade slips to inform their friends, who quickly hurried over and also spread the word. Over the course of the following 4 hours, the mountain peak came to be surrounded by tens of thousands of onlookers, who packed together to listen to Meng Hao lecture about plants and vegetation. Many among the audience were people who had heard of the events that had previously occurred, and were skeptically listening to Meng Hao for the first time. However, after listening for only a short time, their eyes went wide, and they were quickly absorbed in the information, seemingly entranced. Meng Hao lectured for an entire day, after which he started to look a bit tired. Ladies and gentlemen of the clan, it's not that I don't wish to continue, but I really don't have enough time. I have to go do some tasks for the clan. Next time I'm free, I'll be sure to come back. No matter what the crowd said to try to get him to stay, Meng Hao refused and immediately left the Tao of Alchemy Division. Later, for no apparent reason, Fang Zai suddenly became interested in the Tao of Alchemy. He pulled some strings to get a chance to become an apprentice alchemist and went directly to Peak 7191, quickly becoming familiar with some of the apprentice alchemists there. In the following days, whenever Meng Hao returned, Fang Zai was in the crowd. Every time Meng Hao showed up, it was evening, and he would only talk for 4 hours before leaving. Of course, each and every time, he would stop right at a critical moment in the lecture, which made the apprentice alchemists even more excited to hear what was next. He would always appear to really wish to keep lecturing, but be unable to because of clan assignments, and would leave. On one particular occasion, he lectured for about 6 hours before preparing to leave. It was at this point that one of the apprentice alchemists called out in a loud voice. Fang Hao, isn't the point of performing clan assignments to get merit points? How about I give one of my merit points to you, and you keep talking for 2 hours? What do you think? This apprentice alchemist was none other than Fang Zai. From the look on his face, he was prepared to go all out, to pay any price necessary to gain more knowledge of plants and vegetation. As soon as the words left his mouth, the surrounding apprentice alchemists hesitated for a moment. However, there were a few others who immediately voiced their approval, calling out to Meng Hao, who stopped in his tracks. "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea," he said hesitantly. "What's not good about it?" hollered Fang Zai at the top of his lungs. "Fang Hao, your skill in plants and vegetation is so high that even a Tier 2 alchemist is no match for you. If you're willing to sacrifice your own merit points for the clan and for us, then we're willing to do the same thing for you. If we weren't, it would be a huge shame for us." Other apprentice alchemists began to chime in. "That's right, Fang Hao, during these days, we've personally witnessed the sacrifices you have been making for the sect and for us. We're all very grateful. Fang Hao, you're a chosen, and yet you're not arrogant at all. No matter what questions we come up with about plants and vegetation, you patiently answer them all. You deserve to get merit points from us." "That's right, Anyone who refuses to part with their merit points should just get the hell out of here. The most valuable thing in the world isn't bullying other people. It's knowledge. As the atmosphere in the area grew more passionate, Meng Hao's face filled with emotion. Finally, he took a deep breath and stood tall on the platform, nodding his head. "Very well," he said, sounding determined. "Thank you for your support, everyone. Since all of you demand this, then I will forego any service to the clan, and will instead personally impart all of my knowledge of plants and vegetation to all of you. For 2 hours I'll charge only 1 merit point per person. Don't offer any more. If you do, I won't accept." The surrounding apprentice alchemists all had strange looks on their faces. Some were actually looks of disdain. How could people not have at least some idea of what had just happened? Chapter 908, Medicine Pavilion. Immediately, conversations rippled through the crowd. "He's actually charging a fee. Doggone it, how shameless, how fake. Let's go to some other peak. None of the other alchemists charge merit points." Almost immediately, tens of thousands of apprentice alchemists flicked their sleeves and left. Meng Hao watched them leave and sighed. "These Fang clan people are so stingy," he thought. "There were so many people before, but as soon as I mentioned charging merit points, so many of them just got up and left." In the end, only about 1,000 people remained behind. To them, 1 merit point wasn't very much. Considering it was Meng Hao who was lecturing, they felt it was worth it. This time, Meng Hao lectured for 6 hours, after which he collected several thousand merit points, then left the Tao of Alchemy Division and returned to his Immortal's Cave. A few hours later, Fang Zai returned, looking both excited and cautious at the same time. The parrot perched on one of his shoulders, the meat jelly on the other. He looked very proud of himself. "Cause, we really made a profit this time." Meng Hao laughed, and his eyes glowed with bright light. In the Fang clan, merit points were essentially the same thing as spirit stones, or even immortal jades. Anything you wanted required an exchange of merit points. Meng Hao waved his sleeve, producing a jade medallion. After scanning it with divine sense, he partitioned 100 merit points and transferred them to Fang Zai. "We need to make sure the apprentice alchemists you hired don't get discouraged. Tell them that the better they do in promoting me, the more merit points they can earn." Fang Zai was actually quite excited. He had never before thought of using such a method to earn merit points. Normally speaking, the most he could ever get in a 1-month period was about 500, but just now, it only took about 6 hours to make several thousand. To him, it made Meng Hao even more enigmatic than before. It was at this point that Fang Zai said, "Cause, I promised them 10 points apiece." "Don't be stingy, Fang Zai," Meng Hao replied, sounding very solemn. "Look, don't take this the wrong way, but you're simply too stingy. You need to think big. It's just a bit of money, right? If cultivators like us are constantly thinking about material things, then how can we ever increase our cultivation base?" Fang Zai gaped for a moment in hesitation, but couldn't hold back from carefully saying, "Cause, what I mean is, you didn't give enough. I promised them 10 per person, and I hired 173 people." Meng Hao's face immediately flickered, and he said nothing for a moment. His silence caused Fang Zai to immediately get nervous, and he quickly continued, "Cause, I know I messed up. Next time I hire them, I'll tell them it'll be 50 per person." Meng Hao's cheek suddenly twitched. Taking a deep breath, he looked at Fang Zai and sincerely said, "Fang Zai, listen. You haven't lived the hard life, so you don't know how difficult things can be. Do you know what cultivators like us use up the most? Resources, spirit stones, immortal jades. If you want to be stronger than everyone else, then you need more spirit stones, more resources. That's the path to power. Now, don't take this the wrong way, but you need to learn how to work hard and live a simple life. Be diligent, thrifty. Learn how to take only 1 merit point and split it 10 ways. That's how cultivators like us can reach the top and stay there." Meng Hao patted Fang Zai's shoulder. Suppressing the inward pain he felt, he took out his command medallion and once again sent his divine sense out, causing 1,000 merit points to transfer over. "Remember what I just told you," Meng Hao urged. 1 merit point split 10 ways. You can't just throw your money away." Fang Zai gaped at Meng Hao in utter shock. The words he had spoken just now were the complete opposite of what he had said before, and yet both made sense. In the end, Meng Hao couldn't hold back from adding, "Next time you hire people, it's 1 merit point per person. That should be enough." Sighing, he turned and headed into his residence. Of the more than 3,000 merit points he had started out with, he now had less than half left. It was quite a blow. Add to that the fact that later that night, Meng Hao had to duplicate more spirit elixir to use on the nirvana fruit, and the result was that, by the following day, his bag of holding once again seemed sadly shrunken. By that time, Meng Hao truly felt as if he were about to go crazy. He loved spirit stones and loved being wealthy. Furthermore, what he loved least was spending his spirit stones. To him, it felt like draining out his own blood. At dawn, Meng Hao emerged. When Fang Zai saw him, he stared in shock. "Cause, what's wrong?" he asked, concerned. Meng Hao's eyes were completely red, and his expression had become somewhat vicious. He took a deep breath and cleared his head. Deep within his eyes, a brilliant light flickered. "I have to get rich. I have to get merit points." Meng Hao returned to the Tao of Alchemy Division and to Peak 7191. Yet again, he lectured about plants and vegetation. However, this time, there were actually fewer people than last time, only about 900. There wasn't much he could do. In order to get as many merit points as possible, he lectured for an entire day before leaving in exhaustion. Each time he came after that, there were fewer people. After about a month, there were just over 400 people who came, causing Meng Hao to sigh. The ones that stayed behind were the original group of apprentice alchemists, the ones whose fervor toward Meng Hao was the most intense. Among their number was also Tier 1 alchemist Fang Qin, who fairly worshipped Meng Hao. After finishing his lecture, Meng Hao didn't leave. Instead, he went to Fang Qin's Immortal's Cave and directly asked some questions. "Fang Qin, in the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy Division, how do apprentice alchemists get promoted to full alchemist?" Fang Qin always treated Meng Hao very respectfully. Despite his surprise about the question, he quickly answered. "To become a full alchemist, you have to concoct at least 1,000 Tier 1 medicinal pills, and must also pass through the first level of the medicine pavilion. The first thing to do is pass through the medicine pavilion. That indicates that your skill with plants and vegetation has reached the level of a Tier 1 alchemist. Unfortunately, it's very difficult. Anyone in the Tao of Alchemy Division who hasn't studied plants and vegetation for at least 10 years would have a very hard time passing the first level. Take me, for example. I can concoct Tier 2 medicinal pills, although my success rate isn't very high. However, despite my best efforts, I barely passed the examination of the medicine pavilion. Due to my lack of skill in plants and vegetation, I wasn't able to get past the second level, and in the end, I became a Tier 1 alchemist." Fang Qin chuckled bitterly. "Medicine pavilion?" asked Meng Hao, his eyes sparkling. "How do you get into it?" "It doesn't matter if you're a full alchemist or an apprentice alchemist. Anyone can enter the pavilion at any time. The medicine pavilion was set up in the past by a patriarch of the Tao of Alchemy Division. It tests everything that you can think of, and has 9 levels, which corresponds to the 9 tiers for alchemists. Anyone who feels confident enough can pay 100 merit points to go to the inner mountains and take the medicine pavilion trial by fire." "It's extremely hard," said Fang Qin, lowering his voice. "Of all the apprentice alchemists from Peak 7191, only about 7 or 8 might be able to attempt it, and that would only be after another 10 or more years of study. As for the rest, most would need dozens of years of study before they could even think about trying. If you were to try to brute force imprint your memory with knowledge, your mental world would burst from being overwhelmed by the infinite possible varieties of plants and vegetation. Unless your cultivation base is at an unfathomable level, of course." Meng Hao knew that when it came to plants and vegetation, there were endless variations, which were hard to imprint with spiritual sense. After hearing Fang Qin's explanation, Meng Hao began to mutter to himself. Then, a plan started to form in his mind. "Is there any other way to become a full alchemist?" Meng Hao asked. "Other ways?" Fang Qin thought for a moment, and then his eyes brightened. However, they grew dull again just as quickly. "There is, but it's too difficult. In fact, it's impossible to succeed that way. For tens of thousands of years, there have been 3 specific medicinal pills in the Tao of Alchemy Division which, if any full alchemist or apprentice alchemist can concoct, will allow them to immediately be promoted to Tier 8 alchemist. That person would instantly become famous in the entire clan. Those 3 pills are famous pills concocted by past patriarchs. Unfortunately, even though they left pill formulas behind after they perished, no one has been able to successfully concoct them. In all of Planet East Victory, even the Medicine Immortal sect is only capable of concocting 2 of those pills. Of course, even though the Medicine Immortal sect has its roots in the Fang clan, and might even be considered a branch of the sect and a part of our Tao of Alchemy, they are still almost considered outsiders. The fact that they can concoct pills that we cannot is somewhat disgraceful. That's why those 3 pill formulas were placed in the pill pavilion. The clan has posted incredible rewards for concocting them. Supposedly, the reward for even the most simple of the 3 includes immortal jade, tons of spirit stones, and 5 million merit points, not to mention vast quantities of medicinal plants, magical items, and technique manuals. Unfortunately, after all these tens of thousands of years, nobody has ever succeeded. Even our only Tier 9 alchemist, Pill Elder Fang Danyun, had to admit that he can't concoct them. 1. Fang Danyun's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Fang Danyun. Dan means pill, Yun means cloud. Fang Kun shook his head. Meng Hao's eyes glittered, and then almost seemed to glaze over. Another thing, because the cost of the medicinal plant ingredients is so high, anyone who attempts to concoct the simplest of those pills must put up 1 million merit points as a collateral. Regardless of whether they succeed or fail, the merit points will be erased. When Meng Hao heard that, he felt like someone had grabbed him by the neck and started squeezing down tightly. It took him a long moment before he could breathe again. Merit points again. He suddenly frowned and pushed down the impulsive feelings rising up in his heart. After spending a bit of time planning, his eyes began to glitter. "Take me to the medicine pavilion," he suddenly said. You want to try to challenge the medicine pavilion?" asked Fang Kun, looking shocked. Then he suddenly looked excited. He was well aware that he had no idea as to the limits of Meng Hao's skill in plants and vegetation. "Try to challenge the medicine pavilion," Meng Hao replied, sounding surprised. "What are you going to pay for it?" "Nah, I'm not going to try to challenge it, I'm just going to take a look at the first level." With that, Meng Hao flew out of the immortal's cave. No, I'm not going to pay for it." Fang Kun hurried to follow as Meng Hao shot through the mountains. Soon 2 mountain peaks appeared ahead of Meng Hao, between which was an enormous treasure pavilion, floating there in mid-air, emanating brilliant and colorful light. Clouds and mist floated around it, and it truly looked like an abode of immortals. 2 old men sat cross-legged outside of the treasure pavilion, next to an enormous stone slab. "This is the medicine pavilion," Fang Kun said softly, a pious look in his eyes. "According to the stories, this pavilion is actually a magical item, a precious treasure that the first-generation patriarch brought from off-planet. It was originally owned by someone else, and had always attempted to fly away to rejoin him. However, after the patriarch passed away in meditation, it has remained locked in place here, floating in midair and unable to go anywhere." Meng Hao's eyes flickered, and he flew up into the air directly toward the medicine pavilion. As soon as he got close, an incredibly powerful medicinal aroma hit him in the face. In the blink of an eye, he sensed millions upon millions of different types of medicinal aromas all mixed together. So many types of plants and vegetation, thought Meng Hao with a gasp. He was still outside, and yet could already tell how terrifying it must be inside. As he neared, the 2 old men who acted as guards outside the medicine pavilion opened their eyes. They appeared to be incredibly ancient, as if they were immortal divinities with unfathomable cultivation bases. From what he could tell, they were even more powerful than the Grand Elder. His face solemn, he clasped hands and bowed. The 2 old men looked over Meng Hao, and it almost seemed as if they could see through him. Finally, they retracted their gazes and closed their eyes. Meng Hao took a deep breath and then looked at the huge stone stele that rested off to the side. The stone stele was divided into 9 levels, upon each of which were written names. The first level had the most names, hundreds of thousands of them. After the first level, the higher you went, the fewer names there were, and some of the names were gray-colored. On the 9th level, there were 10 names, with 9 being gray and 1 shining brightly. Fang Danyun /expand. In the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division, there was currently only 1 Tier 9 alchemist, the man known as Pill Elder, Fang Danyun. Meng Hao looked at the 10 names on the 9th level of the stone stele, and suddenly thought of his master Pill Demon. From my current perspective, it's now obvious that Pill Demon's skill in the Tao of Alchemy vastly exceeded any standards for planet South Heaven. Were it not for the fact that he lacked certain medicinal plant ingredients, he would surely have been able to concoct some medicinal pills that were famous in all the 9th mountain and sea. Now he's a member of the Kunlun Society with even more resources at his disposal and able to focus completely on the Tao of Alchemy. When Meng Hao thought of his master, he couldn't help but also think of a certain woman. It was Chu Yuyan, who had left with Pill Demon to go to the Kunlun Society. Waiting to meet out in the big wide world is a beautiful type of regret, Meng Hao shook his head. To him, emotions were not everything. In this life it was enough for him to have only Su Qing. Even more important was to accomplish something incredible, all on his own. I'm going to become the richest person in all the Ninth Mountain and Sea, he thought, his eyes filling with determination as he strode into the medicine pavilion. As soon as he entered, a gentle light swept over him, and his identity Jade medallion flew out. Glittering light could be seen as 100 clan merit points were deducted from within. Meng Hao's heart twinged in pain. Those 100 merit points represented lecturing to 100 apprentice alchemists for 2 hours. No pain, no gain, he thought. I'm going to go for it. Gritting his teeth, he continued onward into the medicine pavilion. Suddenly, he found himself surrounded by thick mists that made it difficult to see. After a moment, a glowing light appeared in front of him, within which were 1,000 types of medicinal plants. It was hard to see them clearly as they were obscured by mist. Simultaneously, an archaic voice echoed throughout the first level. 100 breaths of time. Identify at least 900 medicine plants and imprint them with divine sense. You will be given 10 sets. Completing 9 of them will count as passing the level. As soon as the voice finished speaking, the mists covering the 1,000 medicinal plants vanished, leaving them clearly visible. Meng Hao's gaze passed over them, and he immediately recognized all of them. However, he did not imprint any of them with divine sense, but instead committed all 1,000 plants to memory. 100 breaths of time quickly passed, and the light flickered. The 1,000 medicinal plants vanished, to be replaced by another set of 1,000. Meng Hao quickly looked them over, and his eyes sparkled as if with electricity. After committing the medicinal plants to memory, he waited for the 100 breaths of time to end, and the third set of 1,000 medicinal plants to appear. In this manner, he consumed all 10 opportunities that he was given. After being shown 10,000 medicinal plants, he was wrapped up by a gentle force, and in the blink of an eye, sent flying out of the first level of the medicine pavilion, to appear outside. Fang Kun was waiting outside, filled with anticipation. As soon as he saw Meng Hao appear, his jaw dropped. Whenever anybody passed the first level, glowing lights would appear. And yet, the first level looked exactly the same as when Meng Hao had entered it. Fang Kun gaped in shock, and was about to step forward when Meng Hao suddenly strode directly back toward the entrance, paid his 100 merit points, and entered the medicine pavilion again. Inside, he once again memorized the 10,000 medicinal plants that were shown to him, and was expelled. Gritting his teeth, he went in again. Twice, 3 times, 4 times. In a relatively short period of time, Meng Hao entered 10 times. His merit points were vanishing rapidly. However, he stuck with it. Fang Kun was struck dumb and could scarcely believe that Meng Hao couldn't pass the first level of the medicine pavilion. And yet, here he was watching the bizarre scene play out right in front of him. What exactly is he doing? Thought Fang Kun. In his estimation, it should be a relatively simple matter for Meng Hao to pass the first level of the medicine pavilion. He just couldn't figure out why he would want to go in at the same level over and over again. Time passed. Meng Hao, seemingly bewitched, tried out the first level 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. In the end, he entered the first level 100 times. That was 10,000 merit points, and considering he hadn't even earned 20,000 merit points over the last month or so, that meant he had now depleted his supply by more than 60%. 100 times, he said after appearing outside. He looked over at the medicine pavilion and took a deep breath. After taking the examination over 100 times, he had been shown 1 million medicinal plants. However, many of those were actually duplicates. After some thought, he looked at the more than 4,000 merit points he had left, gritted his teeth, and entered the medicine pavilion yet again. After passing through 40 more times, Meng Hao had less than 100 merit points left. The 2 old men sitting outside the medicine pavilion watched his odd behavior with fascination. They could clearly sense the determination that filled him. 140 times. You would think that 1,400,000 medicinal plants would appear. But in reality, when you eliminate the repetitions, there were only about 1 million. From all those 1 million medicinal plants, each section of the test only selects 1,000. All you need to do is recognize 900, and then do that 9 times. In other words, in any given test, you actually only have to identify about 8,100 medicinal plants correctly. When you think about it that way, it's not really that hard. Meng Hao mused thoughtfully. In particular, there were about 5,000 medicinal plants that recurred most often in the test, which had special significance. These were plants that were easily confused with others. Eyes glittering, he turned and left, followed by Fang Qun. Fang Qun wanted to ask some questions, but after seeing Meng Hao's thoughtful look, he hesitated and then decided not to interrupt. Evening was falling, but Meng Hao did not return to his immortal's cave. Instead, he accepted Fang Qun's invitation to stay at his immortal's cave for the night. During that time, he did not practice cultivation, but instead took out a jade slip and began to analyze and record information from his 140 examinations in the medicine pavilion, and to gather together information about the most common medicinal plants to appear. Day and night, he classified and categorized the different plants. 3 days later, he emerged, his expression one of exhaustion, and yet with brightly gleaming eyes. Measly medicine pavilion, he thought. I'm going to help all of the apprentice alchemists who listen to my lectures pass the first level of the medicine pavilion. When that happens, there will definitely be a huge increase in my audience. He laughed heartily, and his eyes shone with anticipation and determination. To do something like he was doing was something no other alchemist would ever think was possible. The reason Meng Hao could do it was because his skill in plants and vegetation had reached a completely terrifying level. Because of that, he was capable of memorizing and then organizing all of those 1 million medicinal plants. Of course, other high-level alchemists might be able to do the same thing. However, they would never think to use the same method, to waste such energy and such a large amount of merit points, to organize all that information for the purpose of cheating. After spending a few more days organizing all of the information and data, Meng Hao was completely confident. The next time he went to lecture the more than 400 fanatical apprentice alchemists, all the content was regarding information about those specific medicinal plants. He especially focused on the most common plants, as well as the ones that were most easily misidentified. This was a method that focused specifically on memorizing correct answers. Meng Hao completely forgot any exhaustion he felt and committed himself to lecturing. A month later, the number of apprentice alchemists didn't increase, but neither did it decrease. By the time that month ended, Meng Hao had finished introducing all of the plants that most commonly appeared in the medicine pavilion test. After finishing a lecture, he would wave his hand and use the magic of a divine ability to cause 1,000 medicinal plants to appear. Next, I'll give you a little test, he said. I'll give you 2 hours to try to identify as many of these 1,000 medicinal plants as possible. Mark down any that you don't know. When the time limit is up, I'll give you the correct answers. This was a completely fresh and new experience for these apprentice alchemists, but as for Fang Qun, he looked on with wide eyes. After listening to Meng Hao's lectures for a month, he was starting to feel a bit apprehensive. After all, he had passed through the first level of the medicine pavilion and was starting to pick up on what Meng Hao was doing. This was especially the case when Meng Hao started using the same testing method as the first level of the medicine pavilion. It was at this point that he started panting, and a look of astonishment could be seen on his face. Don't tell me. He actually went through the first level of the medicine pavilion more than 100 times just to be able to see all the test's contents. That's basically the same as just seeing all the answers. Now that he's giving specific lectures about the answers, these apprentice alchemists will have a much higher chance of passing the examination. That's cheating. It's even more so the case considering he's using the same testing method as the medicine pavilion, just to get them used to it. Fang Qun couldn't help but gape in shock. 2 hours later, the images vanished, and the apprentice alchemists began to ask questions about the medicinal plants they couldn't identify. Meng Hao emphasized various key points, and then waved his hand again, causing another set of images to appear. It was in this fashion that time slowly passed. Meng Hao rarely returned to his immortal's cave. Most of his time was spent in the Tao of Alchemy division. Eventually, he reduced the amount of time he gave the apprentice alchemists from 2 hours to 1 hour, then to the time it takes an incense stick to burn, then half that amount of time. By the time another month had passed, Meng Hao had reduced the time limit to 100 breaths. His audience gradually got used to it, and eventually started to get excited about the continually increasing number of medicinal plants they could identify, and the continuously increasing speed at which they could identify them. Actually, it was virtually impossible for them not to identify the medicinal plants, because during that time, Meng Hao lectured exclusively on the contents of the medicine pavilion examination. During that 3-month period, the apprentice alchemists gave most of their merit points to Meng Hao. In exchange, There were more than 100 among the group who had reached the point of being able to identify more than 900 medicinal plants in 100 breaths of time. On that day, Meng Hao ceased lecturing. Instead, he looked seriously at all of the 400 members of his audience. "Your merit points have not been spent in vain," he announced. "Right now, all of us are going to the medicine pavilion to participate in the first level examination. Trust me, at least 20% of you will definitely pass." In response, the apprentice alchemists looked at him with shock and hesitation. "Fang Quen, lead the way," said Meng Hao, waving his hand. Fang Quen gritted his teeth, nodded, and walked forward. The 400 unconfident apprentice alchemists then followed his lead to the medicine pavilion. Meng Hao flew along with them. Along the way, more than few people noticed what was going on, and when they heard that the group was going to the medicine pavilion to take the examination, they began to laugh out loud. How long have they been studying? And they think they can take on the first level of the medicine pavilion. Without studying about plants and vegetation for dozens of years, how could you possibly succeed in the medicine pavilion? Do you people want to just throw away their merit points or something? That's funny. A lot of them have barely studied plants and vegetation for 3 years, right? More and more apprentice alchemists took note. All of them wondered what the reason was for all of this, and they began to laugh and ridicule them. Chapter 909, Cheating. Chapter 910, Rocking the Pavilion. The ridicule caused many of the 400 apprentice alchemists to feel very embarrassed and even hesitant. They weren't confident in their chances of success at all, but Meng Hao was very enthusiastic about the whole matter. Were it anyone else, they would think they were intentionally being set up to look bad. "Ignore all of them, trust me," cried Meng Hao, his expression solemn. The 400 apprentice alchemists gritted their teeth. They still weren't confident, and yet were still interested in knowing how far away they were from being able to succeed in the first level of the medicine pavilion. The sound of the onlookers' mockery rang out, and there were quite a few people who decided to follow along to see what happened when the group tried to pass the examination in the medicine pavilion. There were some Tier 1 alchemists who recognized Fang Quen, and when they saw what was going on, shook their heads. "Fang Quen is really too short-sighted. Those are apprentice alchemists from Peak 7191, right?" Although it's true that an alchemist lecturer will receive a reward if any apprentice alchemist from their peak passes the first level of the medicine pavilion, these people only have a few years of experience with the Tao of alchemy. They definitely have no chance of succeeding. "I heard that Fang Hao took over for Fang Quen over the past few months to give lectures at Peak 7191. He even started charging merit point fees. What a joke." Surrounded by laughter and ridicule, Fang Quen and the 400 apprentice alchemists slowly passed into the inner mountains and then appeared in front of the medicine pavilion. Although some of the alchemists in the inner mountains noticed them passing by, none took an interest. Granted, there were 400 people all going to take the test together, but that wasn't something unheard of. After all, there were many, many people who were members of the Tao of Alchemy Division. Furthermore, the medicine pavilion was a mysterious place. Entrance was not limited to a single person. Even 10,000 could enter at one time if they wished. The interior of the pavilion would appear empty to each participant, as if they were taking the test alone. The 400 apprentice alchemists gritted their teeth, paid their merit points, and were about to step into the medicine pavilion when Meng Hao took a deep breath and called out, "All of you remember, just do things the way you normally do, and you won't have any problems." The 400 apprentice alchemists gave nervous, forced smiles to Meng Hao as they clasped hands and bowed to him. Then, clenching their jaws, they entered the medicine pavilion one after another. In the blink of an eye, 400 people vanished. By this point, a few thousand people had gathered to watch, and were all laughing and joking. Fang Quen was extremely nervous. Many of the people who had gathered were familiar with him, and he could clearly hear their jokes, but there was nothing he could say in response. Meng Hao's expression was calm, as he floated there in midair looking at the medicine pavilion. Meanwhile inside, the 400 apprentice alchemists inside all faced empty mists. Then, 1,000 medicinal plants appeared in front of them, and the vast majority were shocked. How come it's exactly like the tests alchemist Fang gave us? This seems, actually kind of simple. I know almost all of these. 100 breaths of time. I've practiced so many times I'm used to it. Virtually all of the apprentice alchemists were shocked and excited. Earlier, they never believed that they could succeed, but now they suddenly felt hope. Time passed by, 1,000 breaths. Of course, the onlookers were all still laughing about the matter. I really don't get what Fang Kun is thinking. And as for all those apprentice alchemists, they don't know the height of the heavens and the depths of the earth. There's no way they can succeed. Time's almost up. They'll be coming out soon. If even one of them succeeds, I'll beat myself to death. It was at this point that a beam of light appeared on the first level. Instantly, the laughing was silenced. Wow, somebody actually succeeded. Well, I guess out of 400 people, it was inevitable that someone would get lucky. It's possible that person is a chosen in the Tao of alchemy. It's a given that someone like that would perform shockingly. Even as the discussions broke out, silence once again reigned as a second beam of light appeared on the first level. After that, a third, fourth, and a fifth. 113 beams of light appeared in the blink of an eye. They formed a dazzling spectacle that could be seen from quite a distance away. The onlookers were deathly quiet and stared with gaping mouths. Their eyes were wide and filled with disbelief, and their minds roared. This vastly exceeded anything they could have ever imagined, and they could hardly believe it. It was at this point that, from within the dazzling lights, 400 apprentice alchemists appeared. The ones who had succeeded in passing the first level were wild with joy. As for the ones who had met with failure, they weren't dejected at all. Instead, their eyes shone brightly with hope. They knew that they had come very close to succeeding. All of them rushed over to Meng Hao and began crying out excitedly. That was so simple, I actually identified all of them. I did it, ha ha ha, I passed. I've only studied the Tao of Alchemy for 3 years, but I passed the first level of the Medicine Pavilion and I succeeded. Thank you, Alchemist Fang, thank you. Fang Kun was equally excited. Meng Hao smiled widely, then cleared his throat. After glancing over at the shocked onlookers, he looked back at the apprentices and then put a solemn expression onto his face. What's there to be excited about? What's the surprise? During these 3 months, you paid a few hundred merit points to listen to my lectures about plants and vegetation. So the big surprise would be if you didn't pass the measly first level of the Medicine Pavilion. Now, all of you, tell me, was it worth it to spend those merit points on listening to my lectures? The instant the question left his mouth, the more than 400 apprentice alchemists joined their voices into a mighty roar of approval. All of the onlookers began to tremble inwardly. Meng Hao laughed heartily, then turned to leave, sure that this matter would quickly turn into a massive wave that swept through all of the Tao of Alchemy division. I need to stop giving lectures for a few days, he thought. I'll wait a bit, and then there will surely be more people willing to fork over their merit points. His eyes glittered with anticipation. However, Meng Hao had actually underestimated the matter. Over the course of the following days, the Tao of Alchemy division was struck by a massive tempest. After all, 400 people had simultaneously taken the Medicine Pavilion examination, and then more than 100 had successfully passed. That in and of itself was not shocking. However, when you took into account the amount of time those test takers had been studying the Tao of Alchemy, it was completely astonishing. Those who had studied the longest had 5 years under their belt. The shortest amount of time any of them had studied was 3 years. An event such as this was enough to cause shock even among the alchemists of the inner mountains. It eventually reached the point that the Alchemist Council, which was responsible for the operational affairs of the Tao of Alchemy division, called a session to discuss the matter. 19 alchemists converged in the meeting location. These were the pavilion elders of the Tao of Alchemy division. All of these 19 pavilion elders were Tier 8 alchemists. Deep in the inner mountains, on the cloud-cloaked peak of a tall mountain, was an ancient temple. 10 enormous statues stood guard outside the temple, each one of which represented a glorious past alchemist of the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division. This was the location where the Alchemist Council held their session. In the main hall of the temple, 19 enormous seats floated in the air, in the middle of which was an enormous illusory pill cauldron that emanated flickering light. The seats were occupied by ancient old men with extraordinary cultivation bases, and whose Tao of Alchemy could shake heaven and earth. Any one of these old men could be the founding grandmaster of an alchemic sect. Fang Hao arrived 4 months ago from planet South Heaven, said one of the old men, whose face was covered with wrinkles. He barely seemed to have the energy to open his eyes, but a strong medicinal aroma was eternally attached to him. With a 30,000-meter bloodline gatebeam, he is a chosen of the clan. Later, the Grand Elder from the main clan arranged for him to come to the Tao of Alchemy division. Therefore, Tier 5 alchemist Fang Huiguo took responsibility to send him to Alchemy Lodge Peak 7191. I made some of my own inquiries, and also got some answers from Fang Huguo. Fang Huguo believed that while Fang Hao might have some understanding regarding pill concocting, he was also wildly arrogant. Let's ignore his subjective presumptions for now. Within 2 hours of Fang Hao's arrival at Peak 7191, he discovered 12 areas in which Tier 1 alchemist Fang Qun made errors in explaining plants and vegetation. Fang Hao then personally gave a lecture about the subject that attracted tens of thousands of spectators. Tier 2 alchemist Fang Zhejiang was incited by the main clan's Fang Yuni to challenge Fang Hao, making a wager regarding plants and vegetation. Fang Hao easily defeating him, instantly identifying the top-secret grafting technique of a Tier 5 alchemist, and also revealing the collocation technique. I personally went to verify that the collocation technique was indeed correct. Later, he used his plant and vegetation lectures to collect merit points from the audience. At this point, the old man paused. Some of the other elders began to chuckle. His audience dwindled to only a few hundred people, and his profit ranged only in the tens of thousands of merit points. Unsatisfied, he went to the medicine pavilion, where he took the examination 140 times in a row. He didn't pass, not even once. However, that was because he intentionally failed. After finishing, he organized all the information about plants and vegetation from the exam and began to lecture the apprentice alchemists of Peak 7191 regarding all of the test material from the first level of the medicine pavilion. In this way, by developing a cheating technique and preparing the apprentice alchemists for the test by training them in the test method, he then took 400 people to the first level of the medicine pavilion, and over 100 of them succeeded. Ladies and gentlemen, these are the results of my investigation into Fang Hao. What do all of you think? The old man's voice was cool the entire time. Even he found Meng Hao to be somewhat amusing. People immediately began to voice varying opinions. Is the kid crazy or something? I can't believe he charged merit points for lectures on plants and vegetation. Why didn't I think of that when I was his age? Amusing, but in the end it was cheating. He should be punished somehow. Perhaps have him clear out the pill rubbish receptacles. No way, a punishment like that is too severe. Let me handle it. I'll have him try to concoct some of my pills for me. I'll show him a thing or two. That's not really cheating. To be able to memorize all of the medicinal plants from the first level of the medicine pavilion shows that he has a terrifying level of skill with plants and vegetation. I'm curious to see what level he could get to in the pavilion if he really tried. There were differing views on the matter. Some of them thought it was nothing more than a small matter and were actually interested in Meng Hao. Others thought he was a problem waiting to happen, which should be punished and dealt with immediately. Eventually, everyone finished speaking without reaching a consensus. Located in the middle of the 19 chairs was an old man who wore a long robe and had flowing white hair. He hadn't spoken the entire time and was instead sitting there with his eyes closed. Finally, his eyes opened, and they seemed to be filled with starlight. It was as if all the heavenly bodies had been shockingly fused together and existed inside of him. He cleared his throat. In that moment, all of the other elder alchemists quieted down and looked at the old man with expressions of ardor and veneration. He's nothing more than a member of the junior generation, the old man said slowly. Let him do as he pleases, although the rules of the first level of the medicine pavilion will need to be changed. In response to his word, all of the pavilion elders bowed their heads in acquiescence. As they did, a strange light appeared in the old man's eyes. Kunlun Society alchemy methods, and some vestiges of the demon immortal sect. Interesting, very interesting. Chapter 911, Changes in the Tao of Alchemy Division. When 400 apprentice alchemists all challenged the medicine pavilion together, and over 100 succeeded, the news didn't cause a huge stir in the inner mountains, but in the outer mountains, a tempest erupted. To any apprentice alchemist, passing the first level of the medicine pavilion was a major step in life, and something incredibly important. That was even more so for those who had been studying for dozens or even more than 100 years, and yet still could not pass. They were on the verge of going crazy. Then there were the apprentice alchemists who hadn't been studying for very long. When they saw others who had been studying for a similar period of time suddenly succeed, and not because they were naturally gifted, but rather because they had studied with Fang Hao and listened to his lectures, it is easy to imagine how violent of an uproar it caused. Even more so, the apprentice alchemists who had chosen not to pay merit points to listen to Meng Hao felt intense regret, and couldn't help but think about how a few hundred merit points over the course of 3 months could have gotten them past the first level of the medicine pavilion. Then they would have been pre-qualified to become Tier 1 alchemists, which could not be bought with merit points, no matter how many they offered to pay. Meng Hao didn't make an appearance for 3 days. In the meantime, the storm among the outer mountain apprentice alchemists continued. Tens of thousands had gathered outside of Peak 7191 to wait for Meng Hao. Some people even got into magical combat in order to get a good seat. On dawn of the 4th day, Meng Hao appeared in the Tao of Alchemy division. As soon as people spotted him, word spread like wildfire. Meng Hao was quite pleased about all this. Murmuring to himself about how his methods really were effective, he eventually reached Peak 7191. When he saw how many people were waiting, he immediately got excited. There have to be about 45,000 people here, he thought, panting. At 1 merit point apiece for a 2-hour lecture, I would get around 50,000 merit points. If I lecture for 4 hours, it would be 100,000. If I lectured for 8 hours, 200,000. Eventually, he took a deep breath. Smiling the whole way, looking like a preeminent Taoist master who viewed material wealth as filth, he slowly strode forward. When all of the apprentice alchemists gathered around the mountain saw him, they clasped hands and bowed. Then, they joined voices in greeting. "Greetings, Professor Fang." The combined voices of all the apprentice alchemists echoed out like thunder. Meng Hao stepped foot onto the platform, looked out at the audience with shining eyes, and then cleared his throat. "Today I will lecture for 8 hours, he said. Immediately, Fang's eye flew out of the crowd with a jade slip in hand and called out, "Professor Fang is kind and generous. To him, material wealth means nothing. In previous months, we had to force him to accept our payment. Now, because he cannot bear to watch the clan's apprentice alchemists fail the examination of the medicine pavilion, he has come here to lecture about plants and vegetation. We can't let him down. Come, come. Everyone put some merit points into this jade slip. Even if Professor Fang doesn't want it, we'll force him to take it." At the same time that Fang's eye yelled out these words, a group of several hundred apprentice alchemists flew out from the crowd in various areas, jade slips in the hand. They immediately began to accept merit points from the other apprentice alchemists in their area. This time, not a single one of the 45,000 people departed. All of them paid their merit points, and then the several hundred jade slips were placed in front of Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face darkened. "What do you people think you're doing?" he snapped, flicking his sleeve, and looked very displeased. Yet again, Fang's eye took the lead in crying out, "Professor Fang, this is only what should be yours by right. Sir, please accept." When Fang's eye finished speaking, his hundreds of companions began to shout, "Accept it, Professor Fang. If you don't, we'll be very upset." After listening for a moment, Meng Hao hesitated, then let out a long sigh and collected up the jade slips. "Very well," he said emotionally. "Since you demand it, all I can do is work as hard as possible to help you pass the examination of the medicine pavilion." "Material wealth is nothing," he said, shaking his head. "What I care least about in life is just that money." Inwardly, of course, he was extremely excited and was shouting about how he was rich now. The 8-hour lecture ended quickly. Meng Hao again talked about the key medicinal plants from the medicine pavilion. After a while, he would wave his hand, causing 1,000 medicinal plants to appear, just like the examination in the medicine pavilion. Many of the apprentice alchemists who were experiencing this for the first time were instantly enlivened. In the following days, Meng Hao was engrossed in lecturing about plants and vegetation. He lectured for 8 hours a day, and as time progressed, more and more people came to listen, until the audience exceeded 100,000. The area was packed full of people, and no end could be seen to the massive crowds. This only spurred Meng Hao on to put even more energy into his lectures. He even employed his cultivation base and some divine abilities to broadcast his voice out into the distance so that every person could hear him. He was now making hundreds of thousands of merit points every day. To Meng Hao, that income was a powerful motivating force. Eventually, his lectures became the center of attention of all the outer mountains. As Meng Hao got more and more merit points, he was able to get more and more valuable medicinal plants. As such, the ingredients he needed for the spirit elixir were all replaced by what could be considered treasured items. Soon, the efficacy of the spirit elixir reached a terrifying level. As for the leftover merit points, he would acquire other medicinal plants, which he would take to his immortal's cave to concoct medicinal pills. This enabled his Tao of alchemy to steadily improve with each passing day. He would also exchange merit points for spirit stones, which he would use to duplicate the spirit elixir. The life force in the nirvana fruits continued to grow stronger. Of course, not a few people saw what was happening, and their eyes went bloodshot. The other alchemists gazed over at Meng Hao like ravenous wolves. Although they had never thought to use a method like his, when they saw how much he was profiting, many of them began to imitate him. There were even Tier 5 alchemists who left the inner mountains and began to lecture about plants and vegetation, all in order to earn merit points. Because the Alchemist Council didn't oppose what was happening, it meant they tacitly approved. In fact, they were happy that more alchemists were opting not to spend all their time concocting pills, but instead were going to the outer mountains to speak to the apprentice alchemists about plants and vegetation, as well as the Tao of Alchemy. It was as if the entire Tao of Alchemy division was invigorated and now bustled with activity. Things were very different than before. Now that more alchemists were coming out of the inner mountains and charging to give lectures, some of Meng Hao's audience was being drawn away. However, there were 1,000,000 apprentice alchemists in the Tao of Alchemy division, so even if a few left, others would take their place. The Tao of Alchemy became a place where numerous viewpoints and expressions were now being heard, and everyone was struggling to promote their own perspective. Alchemists began using all sorts of methods to attract more apprentice alchemists to their lectures. Some would even lecture about their top-secret methods. Gradually, because they were able to attract more and more attention, everyone was able to make a handsome profit. Soon, Tier 6 alchemists and even some Tier 7 alchemists were moved to the point of emerging from the inner mountains. The atmosphere in the Tao of Alchemy division had reached a peak, and even the main clan was affected, and the Grand Elder, shocked, made a personal visit. That event caused quite a stir, and word soon spread throughout the clan. As the apprentice alchemists began to run low on merit points, they chose to perform service for the sect, all to get more merit points. People even began to compete over the tasks assigned by the Tao of Alchemy division. Everything was flourishing. What a change in the Tao of Alchemy division. Even the 19 Tier 8 alchemists were very excited. They watched the developments in the atmosphere in the Tao of Alchemy division, and could tell that if things kept going on this way, the Tao of Alchemy division would definitely experience a great rise, and a new generation of alchemists would soon come forth. All of it started with Meng Hao, and because of it, everyone was once again speaking his name. Back in the ancestral mansion, the Grand Elder sat silently in the temple, his face dark. It had already been several months since he gave Meng Hao the nirvana fruits, and there had been plenty of time for him to concoct whatever type of spirit elixir he wanted. And yet, Meng Hao had not suddenly died. By this point, the Grand Elder was starting to put the pieces together. I underestimated him, he thought with a sigh. He must have detected something somehow. What a pity. In any clan, clan rules are everything. All clan members must respect the clan rules. As for him, the Grand Elder shook his head, and within his eyes could be seen a glint of killing intent. In another temple in the ancestral mansion, Fang Zixuan and his father sat there, extremely grim-faced because of the huge name Meng Hao was making for himself. That damned son of a bitch, grumbled Fang Zixuan, frowned. He actually thought up a scheme like this to earn large amounts of merit points. The amount he's earning on a daily basis is enough to cause even my eyes to turn red. With things like this, it's going to be impossible to constrain his development. He looked over at his father. The old man opened his eyes, and a cold glimmer could be seen within. "What are you losing your head over?" he said coolly. "He's just a child. The only reason he came up with this method was because someone from the direct bloodline is coaching him. Even still, it doesn't matter. I have my methods to cut off his source of merit points." With that, he produced a jade slip, imprinted it with some divine sense, and then flung it out the door. "Just wait and see," he said, closing his eyes once again. As Meng Hao rose to prominence, Fang Donghan, who was a member of one of the neutral bloodlines in the clan, was watching. From the very beginning, he had been paying attention to Meng Hao and Fang Wei, and now that he saw Meng Hao becoming famous in the Tao of Alchemy division, his sense of anticipation was growing. 1. In chapter 826, Fang Donghan mused about Meng Hao and Fang Wei fighting. It won't be long now before he and Fang Wei fight each other, he thought. He took a deep breath and then smiled. In the ancestral mansion, in the subterranean immortal's cave, Fang Wei sat cross-legged in meditation. Yet again, there were 9 old men surrounding him, who trembled as their immortal qi was absorbed by Fang Wei. Fang Yuni kneeled in front of him respectfully, eyes shining with zeal as he looked at Fang Wei. A moment later, Fang Wei opened his eyes and finished his session of cultivation. Of the surrounding 9 old men, 3 of them coughed up blood, and then their bodies rapidly withered away until they were desiccated corpses. "What's the matter, Yuni?" Fang Wei asked coolly. "Cousin," replied Fang Yuni, "your cultivation base is incredible. You're just a step away from the immortal realm. When you finally become immortal, you'll be able to sweep across all of the chosen of the 9th mountain and see." Fang Wei's expression was the same as ever, and he didn't respond. He just looked at Fang Yuni. "Cousin," continued Fang Yuni, "do you remember Fang Hao? He's that bastard who was disrespectful to you in the temple a while back. You are generous and open-minded and would never sink yourself to his level, but he's not like that. He is narrow and petty-minded and already views you as a thorn in his side. Recently, he's been using despicable methods to make a name for himself in the Tao of Alchemy division, and he's even started spreading harmful gossip about you. Cousin, he's tarnishing your name, which really makes me mad. Unfortunately, I can't beat him. I can only watch as he rises to prominence in the Tao of Alchemy division." Fang Yuni chuckled bitterly. Fang Wei's expression was the same as usual. He seemed neither joyful nor angry. He looked calmly at Fang Yuni, as if he could see all the way through him, as if he could tell exactly how much of what he had just said was true or false. Seeing that Fang Wei was studying him, Fang Yuni suddenly began to tremble in fear. He had no idea what Fang Wei was thinking, so he didn't dare to say anything further. He was just considering leaving when Fang Wei finally spoke. "Tell me about it." Fang Yuni was immediately enlivened and began to explain in detail everything Meng Hao had done in the Tao of Alchemy division. After listening to everything, Fang Wei closed his eyes for a few moments. Then he opened them and coolly said, "There are a lot of people in the world who like to get things for free. When you have the option of getting something for free or paying, most people will opt for the first. Fang Yuni, do you get my meaning?" Fang Yuni gaped. After a moment of thought, his eyes grew bright, and he rose excitedly to his feet, laughing. Chapter 912, Hardships Prompt Changes. The Tao of Alchemy division was undergoing a renaissance in the form of competition. One high-level alchemist after another came out from the inner mountains to give lectures, all to get merit points from the apprentice alchemists. The Tao of Alchemy division was booming, and the bustle was incredible. Furthermore, competitive fire is something that exists in all people's hearts, and although the alchemists didn't pay too much attention to it, everyone knew that the number of apprentices that could be attracted to any given alchemist's lecture would show how much influence that alchemist had, as well as the level of their Tao of Alchemy. Soon, competition between various parties formed. However, the resulting conflicts proceeded according to the Tao of Alchemy division's rules governing competition. The result was that in the outer mountains, the apprentice alchemists had to make a daily choice. Which alchemist would they go listen to? Of course, Meng Hao wasn't very happy about this. More and more of his audience was being stolen away. In the end, he was only able to keep about 50,000. That was about half of his original audience, which meant that he was losing out on over 100,000 merit points per day. It was as if someone was slicing off his skin. He could endure it, though. After all, his lecture was something unique, and in the end, the apprentice alchemists who listened to his lectures had exponential increases in their confidence in being able to pass the first level of the medicine pavilion. However, it wasn't long before Meng Hao became furious. The reason was because, on the mountain just across from him, Peak 7192, a Tier 7 alchemist had suddenly appeared to give lectures. It was an old woman who rode an enormous 5-colored peacock, and whose expression was haughty and arrogant. She was a Tier 7 alchemist, someone the apprentice alchemists could only hope to meet in person on accident and could never go to seek out. She was like a supreme entity to them. Up to now, there had only been one Tier 7 alchemist who had come out to give lectures. Furthermore, that alchemist did not come out on a daily basis. The 100,000 seats available for those lectures were always the subject of fierce contention. In fact, were there even more seats available, it was certain that more people would attend. Now, another Tier 7 alchemist appeared. She was very famous in the Tao of Alchemy division, and when she came to give a lecture right across from Meng Hao, a lot of the alchemists in his audience immediately went over to listen to her. In a single day, Meng Hao lost more than half of his current audience, leaving him with only about 20,000 apprentice alchemists. He stood there on the platform, looking at the 100,000 people crowded around that old woman, and ground his teeth angrily. That old granny is doing this on purpose, he thought with a cold harumph. The outer mountains were vast, and the lecturing alchemists would always distance themselves from each other and would certainly never get very close. Considering the old woman intentionally selected this particular location, if someone tried to convince Meng Hao she wasn't doing it to target him, he would refuse to believe them. Any apprentice alchemists who came to listen to Meng Hao would look the scene over and then be forced to make a decision. Would they listen to Meng Hao, or would they choose the Tier 7 alchemist? Meng Hao was furious, especially because the old woman only charged 1 merit point for 4 hours of lecturing. That was half as much as Meng Hao. Meng Hao's audience continued to shrink. 3 days later, only about 10,000 remained to listen to him. Were that all there were to the matter, it wouldn't be a big deal. Although his audience had been significantly reduced, he was still making tens of thousands of merit points per day. But over the following days, Meng Hao gradually came to the realization that someone had been imprinting his lecture information onto Jade slips, which they were distributing for free. Information people had to pay 3 merit points to hear personally could be acquired without charge in this fashion. This was a near-fatal blow to Meng Hao's lectures. Soon, his audience dwindled from 10,000 down to only about 1,000. Meng Hao could only watch helplessly as the enterprise he had created was ruined. His audience had started at a peak of 100,000 members, in which he was making hundreds of thousands of merit points per day, and was slowly reduced to only 1,000. Now, he was only making a few thousand merit points per day. One day, Meng Hao took a deep breath and ended his lecture. Then he flew over to the old woman, paid some merit points, and began to listen to her speak. The old woman sat cross-legged on the platform, her 5-colored peacock circling through the air above her. The peacock would occasionally spread its beautiful tail feathers, making it even more magnificent than normal. The old woman spoke indifferently about plants and vegetation, and occasionally mentioned some things about certain techniques of the Tao of alchemy, which would provoke a buzz of comments from the audience. Every single thing the old woman said was original and distinctive. Naturally, she noticed Meng Hao arrive, and an expression of scorn appeared on her face. There weren't even 100 Tier 7 alchemists in the Tao of Alchemy division, and although she was not the most powerful among that group, but more toward the middle of the pack, she still possessed the skill of a Tier 7 alchemist. She had passed the 7th level of the medicine pavilion, so it was a simple thing for her to speak on the subject of plants and vegetation. Her command of knowledge regarding plants and vegetation was terrifying, and normally speaking, she would never show her face to target Meng Hao in the manner she had. However, a member of her auxiliary branch, someone who she could not easily refuse, had made a request. Of course, she was a member of the Tao of Alchemy division, which operated under their own system. But when all was said and done, she was still a member of her clan division, and thus had emerged from the inner mountains. In her opinion, the gap between herself and Meng Hao was as vast as that between heaven and earth. She didn't even actually have to try. All she had to do was give random lectures, and that would be enough to completely destroy Meng Hao. Meng Hao hovered there quietly, listening to the woman speak about plants and vegetation. After enough time passed for an incense stick to burn, his eyes flashed, and he turned to leave. The woman glanced over at him making his way off, and then completely ignored him. In her opinion, Meng Hao's lecture audience would be whittled down until only a few hundred people remained. Eventually, he would be incapable of making any big waves whatsoever. The main reason for her confidence was that she had heard a rumor that the rules of the examination in the first level of the medicine pavilion were going to be changed. Sure enough, 3 days later, an announcement was made in the Tao of Alchemy division that the medicine pavilion's first level rules had been changed. All of the 1 million medicinal plants had been replaced. Now, the examination content could be taken from 10 million plants of various varieties. It was really a terrifyingly high number. In addition, another rule change had been made. Now, the test was to determine how many medicinal plants could be identified in a given period of time. That change instantly caused Meng Hao's lectures to be thrown into chaos. To top it all off, and prevent any unforeseen problems, each apprentice alchemist would only have 1 chance per month to enter the medicine pavilion. These changes completely foiled any of Meng Hao's cheating techniques. All of this was a critical blow to Meng Hao. Within 2 days, his audience dropped from 1,000 to only a few hundred. Most of those were the people who had been his audience all along. However, after some time, many of those also chose to leave. After all, the situation was different than it had been in the beginning, when Meng Hao was outshining anyone and everyone. After all, they now had the chance to hear Tier 7 alchemists speak, and who would turn down an opportunity like that? In the end, Meng Hao was left with a bit more than 70 audience members. All of these blows had struck like lightning, leaving Meng Hao panting. He looked out at his sparse audience of several dozen apprentice alchemists, and suddenly a bright light appeared in his eyes. Then, he turned his head to look over at the nearby mountain with 100,000 people circled around it. "Kaz, what do we do?" Fang Zai asked quietly from off to the side. Even Lord Third and Lord Fifth headed over there. Unexpectedly, the parrot and the meat jelly had rushed over to the other mountain to listen to the Tier 7 alchemist's lecture. It was impossible to say whether they understood what she was talking about, but from the look of it, they were entranced. Meng Hao, of course, knew that the parrot was actually hung up on the five-colored peacock. As for the meat jelly, it was completely oblivious and had merely been dragged along by the parrot. Hardships prompt changes, changes bring solutions. Fang Zai gaped. Somebody is trying to restrict my path to wealth, to cut off my path to riches. It's like they're trying to chop me into pieces with a knife. Meng Hao clenched his jaw and then flicked his sleeve as he flew into the air. Fang Zai followed as he made his way off into the distance. He didn't really understand what Meng Hao had just said, so he quickly asked, "Kaz, what's the plan now?" "There's no plan," Meng Hao replied. "My name is going to rock the Tao of Alchemy Division and end this predicament." As his voice echoed out, he pushed his speed to the maximum. Rumbling sounds could be heard as he shot into the inner mountains. Avoiding any restricted areas, he headed directly toward the medicine pavilion. It didn't take long to reach it. There were a few apprentice alchemists gathered outside, hesitating as to whether or not to enter. There were even some full alchemists off to the side. They all noticed Meng Hao arrive and suddenly seemed energized and began to talk amongst themselves. "I heard word spreading outside that the rules of the first level have been changed. It was all because Fang Hao memorized the entire first level and figured out some way to cheat. That's how all those apprentice alchemists were able to pass so easily. Could it be that he's shown up to try to figure out a way to cheat on the first level again? Interesting. Although, considering the way the rules have been changed, it would be difficult to do that. He can only go in once per month." Meng Hao didn't pause for even a moment as he headed toward the medicine pavilion. The two ancient old men sitting outside the pavilion opened their eyes and looked at Meng Hao. Although they didn't normally pay attention to what went on in the outside world, the occasion in which Meng Hao had charged through the first level 140 times had left a deep impression on them. Combined with the rumors they had heard, they now knew that Meng Hao's efforts back then had been a deliberate effort to study the level for the purposes of cheating. The two old men looked at Meng Hao solemnly. "This is the Tao of Alchemy Division," one of them said. "How can one always think of getting in via alternative paths? Your latent talent is excellent, as is your skill in plants and vegetation. You should tread the straight and narrow path." Meng Hao, apparently directly accepting the advice, clasped hands and bowed to the two old men. "Elders," he said immediately, "I am aware of my mistake. Now is the time for repentance and reformation. I am not here to research cheating methods. I am here to truly test myself." The two old men nodded and closed their eyes. Meng Hao took a deep breath. As everyone in the area looked on, he stepped into the medicine pavilion. As soon as he entered, a few among the Tao of Alchemy Division's 19 Tier 8 alchemists immediately noticed. They ceased their pill concocting and sent out divine scents, which coalesced outside of the medicine pavilion. It was three white-haired old men who materialized. "Don't tell me this Fang Hao has showed up looking for ways to break the system again. Is he addicted? How can the little bastard be such a slow learner? We spent a lot of effort to make the first level completely flawless, and yet he shows up again. If this kid gets up to troublesome things again, I have half a mind to pull him out and smack him around. I wouldn't be scared even if his father showed up. I concocted pills for his father once, you know." Although they seemed angry, they were actually very excited. In all their years, no one had ever appeared who could cause so many problems for them. To them, the whole situation was very amusing. No one was able to detect their presence, except for the two old men keeping guard outside the medicine pavilion, who merely glanced at them. Chapter 913, Changes Bring Solutions. Hardships prompt changes, changes bring solutions. Meng Hao's eyes shone with the light of obsession. This saying was something he had come across in a book he had read when he was a scholar living at the foot of Mount Daqing. Nowadays, he had not forgotten the true meaning of the phrase. However, because of his personality, he had come to a new understanding. To him, the first character of the expression referred to being poor. 1. In Chinese, the first character of the phrase hardships prompt changes, changes bring solutions, by itself could mean poor, but the general meaning of the phrase refers to overcoming an impasse or difficult situation. If I can't make a profit when it comes to merit points, then it means I'm poor. Therefore, I need to think of some ways to change the situation. That's the only way to make it through the impasse. After I make it through, then I can start earning merit points again. After stepping into the first level of the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao was surrounded by mists. He took a deep breath, and his eyes began to shine brightly. In the past, I didn't have a lot of spirit stones, but with over 100 million, it couldn't count as being in short supply. But damn it, the Nirvana fruits basically consume spirit stones. I barely have 30% of my original stockpile. It's like a bottomless pit. Considering I've spent so many spirit stones on them, I definitely can't stop now. I have to keep going. I wonder if the Grand Elder knew all along that I had a lot of spirit stones and wanted to use this method to force me to go broke. A Tier 7 alchemist sitting next to me, lecturing about plants and vegetation, cutting off my path to wealth. That's outright bullying. Unbelievable. Meng Hao was actually very angry. Fueled by obsession and anger, he stalked into the first level of the medicine pavilion and was surrounded by swirling mists. In the blink of an eye, 3 incense sticks materialized in front of him. Black smoke rose up from the first incense stick, swirling through the air to surround Meng Hao. Shockingly, a brilliant light appeared, as well as the images of countless medicinal plants. At first glance, there appeared to be at least 10 million, packed together endlessly. It was only by looking closely that it was possible to clearly make any of them out. In the space of a single breath, before Meng Hao could imprint any of them with divine sense, the 10 million medicinal plants suddenly flickered with light, and then began to superimpose over each other. In the blink of an eye, they all merged together in the form of an ancient tome. The book seemed archaic and old, and 3 characters were written on its cover. Classic of plants and vegetation. Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Next, an ancient voice echoed out through the first level. In the time it takes 3 incense sticks to burn, identify the first 10,000 medicinal plants in the classic of plants and vegetation. If you make 100 mistakes or more, the result will be failure. Now that the rules have changed, thought Meng Hao, this test is certainly a bit more impressive. He sent out his divine sense to open the classic of plants and vegetation to the first page. Visible, there was a single medicinal plant. Quickspirit flower, he thought, identifying it immediately, branding it with divine sense, and also providing a quick description of its properties and use in medicines. The tome flickered, and the second page appeared. Meng Hao made another divine sense imprint with incredible speed. Gradually, it began to appear as if a strong wind were blowing across the tome in front of Meng Hao. The pages flipped rapidly in quick succession. Meng Hao stood there, not speaking, his divine sense covering the tome. To him, identifying these medicinal plants was a simple matter. Before the incense stick had even finished burning, it seemed as if the tome's pages were flipping by so fast they couldn't go any faster. Dozens of pages would flip by in the blink of an eye. By the time the incense stick had burned to about 90%, Meng Hao had already identified 10,000 medicinal plants without making a single mistake. However, he didn't stop there. If his goal was simply to pass the level, then it wouldn't matter. But if he was going to take this exam, he would do so in shocking fashion. He would make sure his name spread far and wide. That was the only way he could ensure that his lectures on plants and vegetation were profitable. Therefore, he continued to identify medicinal plants. Soon, hundreds of pages flipped by in every blink of an eye. As soon as Meng Hao scanned them with divine sense, the profiles and information regarding these plants and vegetation appeared in his mind. 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000. Faster and faster. In the time it took an incense stick to burn, Meng Hao had identified 1 million medicinal plants without a single mistake. The mist around him churned, and brilliant rays of light flickered. It was just barely possible to see countless magical symbols swirling around in response to Meng Hao's miraculous performance. Outside the medicine pavilion, it was impossible to tell what was happening on the inside. Many of the full alchemists and the apprentice alchemists were discussing and speculating about the matter. None of them believed that Meng Hao would fail to pass the level, but then they considered how the rules had been changed and figured that even he might have to expend some effort. The 3 old Tier 8 alchemists looked at each other and then began to talk. How come the kid is taking so long? If he's really interested in taking the examination, then he should be able to pass the first level in the time it takes an incense stick to burn. Since he hasn't come out, does it mean? that the kid is actually going to try to crack the test. Back in the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao was frowning. Time's running out. It seems I was going a bit slow before. His eyes flickered and his right hand suddenly reached out to grab the tome's right cover. At the same time his divine sense exploded out, entering the tome. Meng Hao closed his eyes. In that moment when his eyes closed, his divine sense filled the tome completely. It was as if countless medicinal plants had appeared in front of him, which he immediately began to identify and imprint at top speed. 1,000,000, 1,500,000, 2,000,000. In the blink of an eye, rumbling sounds could be heard, and the mists surrounding him were churning in a violent and shocking manner. Brilliant lights shone out, and more magical symbols appeared, with Meng Hao seemingly at the center of them all. 3,000,000, 4,000,000, 5,000,000. Second incense stick was almost completely burnt out. Meng Hao's skill in plants and vegetation was extremely deep and profound, so much so that it had even left Pilled Demon shaken back in his days in the Violet Fate sect. When you added in his later experiences, his mastery had only increased. By the time he went to the ancient demon immortal sect's illusory world, he had been able to master much of that sect's Tao of alchemy as well. Due to that, his skill in plants and vegetation had risen even higher, reaching an indescribably terrifying level. Right now, all of that accumulated knowledge was exploding out, causing the tome's pages to flip by at incredible speed. It was now impossible to even see the pages moving. Several thousand pages would flip by in the time it takes to blink an eye. The second incense stick finished burning, and the third incense stick ignited. Meng Hao grabbed the other side of the tome with his left hand. It was at that point that 80% of the power of a true immortal exploded out. Glittering lights shone out in all directions, and the mists were seething. A sound like thunder rumbled, and the magical symbols swirled around him endlessly. As of now, this place didn't resemble the medicine pavilion, but rather some bizarre world in which Meng Hao was the nucleus of everything. By now, 10,000 pages flipped by with each blink of an eye. Not a single medicinal plant caused the slightest problem for Meng Hao. Each and every one of them was already encompassed by Meng Hao's skill with plants and vegetation. Outside the medicine pavilion, expressions of bewilderment could constantly be heard. Although they couldn't see the shocking scene on the interior of the medicine pavilion, they felt that something was amiss. Even though some of the people present had ill feelings toward Meng Hao, everyone felt that it would be a simple matter for him to pass the first level. And yet enough time had passed for 2 incense sticks to burn, and yet Meng Hao still hadn't emerged from the first level. Everyone was astonished. However, the 3 Tier 8 alchemists had serious expressions on their faces. As they looked at the medicine pavilion's first level, expressions of shock became visible on their faces. Although they couldn't see what was happening inside, these 3 men were gradually coming to realize that the first floor was building up with incredible pressure. What's this kid doing? That pressure appears when someone identifies more than 1,000,000 medicinal plants. Is it possible that this kid has identified more than 1,000,000 medicinal plants in the time it takes 2 incense sticks to burn? As the old men looked on in shock, Meng Hao had his hands planted firmly on the tome. His eyes shone with brilliant light as he thoroughly identified all of its contents. 6,000,000, 7,000,000, 8,000,000. The third incense stick was still burning, but still had about halfway to go. Finally, a tremor ran through Meng Hao's body and he looked up. His hand slowly released the tome. He had finally reached the very last page. 10,000,000. The entire first level of the medicine pavilion was rumbling, and brilliant lights shone out in all directions. Magical symbols swirled about, and something that sounded like immortal music could be heard drifting about. Usually, when someone passed the first level, a beam of light would appear on the outside. However, when Meng Hao reached the last page of the tome, what people on the outside saw was the entire first level shining with unprecedentedly bright light. It was as if the first level was completely bathed in boundless, unfathomable light that spread out in all directions, and even up into the heavens. The heavenly bodies trembled, and strange colors flashed through the sky. Each and every person in the Tao of Alchemy division, in all 10,000 inner mountains and all 100,000 outer mountains, could now see what was happening. What's going on? Why are there such transformations in heaven and earth? What is that pillar of light? All of the apprentice alchemists listening to lectures were thoroughly shocked as they looked up into the sky at the boundless light. As for the alchemists, their faces flickered with shock. Could it be that some member of the senior generation is concocting pills? No, that's not it. Look at that light. It's rising up from the location of the medicine pavilion. Even the clan members in the ancestral mansion could see the bright light coming from the Tao of Alchemy division. Many clan members left their residences and looked in that direction, expressions of shock on their faces. Everything was shaking, and the countless apprentice alchemists of the Tao of Alchemy division, as well as numerous full alchemists, were all staring in shock. When they realized that the light was coming from the medicine pavilion, they began to fly toward it. In a brief moment, innumerable beams of colorful light filled the Tao of Alchemy division. The crowd outside the medicine pavilion was panting, and their minds trembled. They were shocked and completely ignorant of what exactly was happening. They didn't understand how Meng Hao passing the first level would cause such a boundless light to appear. The three Tier 8 elders exchanged glances and could see the shock in each other's eyes. He identified 10 million medicinal plants. Because the rules have been changed, it's something that nobody has ever done before. The result of his passing the first level in this way is this incredible pillar of Tao light. I can't believe this Fang Hao has such an incredible foundation in plants and vegetation. That's comparable to a Tier 4 alchemist, perhaps even beyond that. However, it's still not quite at the level of a Tier 5 alchemist. Expand. The Tao of Alchemy division was in a tumult. More and more people were showing up outside the medicine pavilion to stare with astonishment at the brilliant light that shone up into the sky. Eyes wide, they immediately began to ask others in the area what was going on, and when they heard that Meng Hao had entered the medicine pavilion, giving rise to these transformations, their expressions were that of incredible shock. I can't believe it's Fang Hao. So, he's the one going through the medicine pavilion. His skill in plants and vegetation actually made the medicine pavilion shine with that much light. I listened to one of his lectures on plants and vegetation once. But is the person who caused such shocking transformations really Fang Hao? By now, more than 10,000 people were present. Even as everyone was staring in shock at the bright light, some people turned their attention to the stone stele outside of the medicine pavilion. Hundreds of thousands of names could be seen on the lowest level of the stone stele. As of this moment, all of the names went dim and then seemed to move backward one space. At the very top of the list was a new name. Fang Hao. When the onlookers saw the name there at the top of the list, another buzz of conversation rose up. It's really Fang Hao. His name is first on the list. Most people who pass this trial have their names show up in the bottom, and only a few ever make it even to the middle of the pack. And yet Fang Hao is actually in first place. For him to take the first spot means that his skill with plants and vegetation is greater than all of the other hundreds of thousands of people on the list. Of course, all the strong alchemists' names are higher up on the stele. Who knows whether Fang Hao will actually continue higher in the medicine pavilion this time, or whether he'll try to find a flaw in the system to benefit the apprentice alchemists, just like the rumors said he did last time. The conversations continued. Eventually, they realized that Meng Hao had not emerged from within the medicine pavilion. That led them to the conclusion that he was continuing with the examination. Everyone immediately got even more excited than before. Also, they wanted to know the exact level of skill Meng Hao had with plants and vegetation, this newcomer who had just recently risen to prominence in the Tao of Alchemy division. It wasn't just them who wanted to know. The surrounding alchemists were also very curious. Inside the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao took a deep breath and waited for the mists around him to slowly fade away. A staircase appeared in front of him, which led to the second level. Meng Hao immediately headed up the stairs. If I'm going to shock people, then I might as well do a thorough job of it, he thought. I'm also curious how far my level of skill with plants and vegetation will take me in the Fang clan's medicine pavilion. In the Fang clan, plants and vegetation are the most important aspect of their Tao of alchemy. In order to rise among the ranks of the alchemists, one must first earn qualifications in the medicine pavilion. Actually, this system makes a distinction between apothecaries and alchemists. After reaching the top of the stairs, he found himself on the second level. Bright light filled the second level, and yet again, 10 million medicinal plants appeared, some of them repeats from the first level. They quickly merged together into the form of a tome. This time, it wasn't 3 incense sticks that appeared in front of him, but 6. Yet again, an archaic voice echoed out through the second level. You have the time it takes 6 incense sticks to burn to identify the first 100,000 medicinal plants, in which case you can pass this level. If you make 10 or more mistakes, you fail. Meng Hao frowned. then looked around at the second level for a moment. So this is the second level, he thought. He stepped forward and opened the book, then poured his divine sense into it and began to imprint the medicinal plants. 3 incense sticks of time seemed to pass relatively quickly. Boundless light shone off of the tome. Meng Hao had already imprinted all 10 million medicinal plants. Rumbling sounds filled the air, and another staircase appeared in front of him. He climbed the stairs to the third level without hesitation. After looking around, an expression of disappointment could be seen on his face. The third level again featured 10 million medicinal plants floating around, which then superimposed to create the same classic of plants and vegetation. However, the requirement to pass this level was not just to identify 100,000, but to identify 1 million, and also to list them in order according to a special method required by the ancient tome. Furthermore, just 3 mistakes would be considered a failure. To Meng Hao, that wasn't very difficult at all. Shaking his head, he stepped forward and opened the ancient classic. This time he only needed 2 incense sticks worth of time before the tome began to rumble and the third level sent bright light outside. Yet again, Meng Hao had passed. When he reached the fourth level, his expression finally brightened. What he saw on the fourth level was fully 10 times as many medicinal plants as he had seen on the third level. There were over 100 million plants, which caused his eyes to glow with a bright light. Now things are getting interesting, he murmured, although there are still too few plants. The 100 million medicinal plants formed together into an ancient tome, which was labeled, yet again, the classic of plants and vegetation. The requirement for the fourth level was to identify 10 million medicinal plants without making any mistakes. A single mistake meant failure. 100 million medicinal plants, huh? Meng Hao took a deep breath, eager to try. Back in the Violet Fate sect, he had really enjoyed examinations like this. They reminded him of his scholar's days back in Mount Daqing and his experiences with the imperial examinations. Without hesitation, he placed his hands onto the book, poured in his divine sense, and immediately began to brand medicinal plants. By now, over 100,000 people were standing around outside the medicine pavilion, having been drawn there by the bright lights. Before the light from the first level had even dissipated, a brilliant light already shone up from the second level, and then the third level. Although the new light wasn't as scintillating and blinding as the light from the first level, it was still shocking. Most importantly, as Meng Hao's name moved up to the second and then the third level, it maintained its position as first in the lists. Many of the surrounding alchemists were watching with very serious expression. He's gotten to the fourth level. This Fang Hao passed all the way through the third level in a very short time. I wonder if the fourth level will cause any problems for him. In the Tao of Alchemy Division's Medicine Pavilion, the first 3 levels are simply foundational. From what I've heard, no more than 10 million medicinal plants will appear. The fourth level is different. The difficulty level is 10 times higher. Back inside the fourth level, Meng Hao's eyes shone with a bizarre light. His divine sense rumbled as he imprinted medicinal plants at an incredible speed. He immediately recognized every medicinal plant that he saw, causing the tome's pages to flip by rapidly. It turned into a blur that, if any outsider was able to see, would leave them shocked. Actually, Meng Hao wanted people on the outside to see. If they could watch, it would definitely be a big help in his efforts to earn merit points. After a moment, he retracted his divine sense and then decided to ask the medicine pavilion if such a thing was possible. Everything was quiet for a moment, before an archaic voice slowly spoke out. The medicine pavilion has no such power now. However, if you can identify all 100 million of these medicinal plants, then I can attempt to do so on the next level. Hearing this, Meng Hao immediately nodded his head, took a deep breath and continued imprinting. In order to give the people on the outside more of a reason to listen to my lectures, in order to earn more merit points, I'm going to go all out. Just wait until I get out of here. I'll definitely raise my prices. 2 hours, 2 merit points. His eyes shone with determination, which seemed to affect his divine sense, making it even faster than before. 1 million, 10 million, 30 million. Meng Hao continuously imprinted the medicinal plants that appeared in his divine sense. The feeling he was experiencing made him sigh emotionally. If he'd had a skill like this when he'd taken the imperial examinations that year, then he would surely have become a high official in the state of Zhao. Although not for very long, he thought. Several hundred years have passed since then. If I hadn't started practicing cultivation, I would be long dead. He shook his head, sighed, and continued to imprint. The tome couldn't even be seen clearly. The pages flipped by so quickly that the whole book seemed frozen in eternity, almost unmoving. 40 million, 50 million, 60 million. Time passed. To Meng Hao, it felt like he wasn't expending any energy at all. Furthermore, his mastery of plants and vegetation seemed to be growing even more firm. 70 million, 80 million, 90 million. In the end, Meng Hao let out a sharp breath and slammed the book shut. 100 million. The medicine pavilion trembled and boundless light shone out in all directions. A staircase appeared, which Meng Hao climbed, filled with anticipation. Everyone outside the medicine pavilion looked on, as brilliant light from the fourth level spread out in all directions. He passed the fourth level. If he passed the fourth level, that basically means he's a Tier 4 apothecary. If his pill-concocting skill is just as strong, he'll be a Tier 4 alchemist. The crowd was in quite a commotion. Of course, there were some people with looks of disdain on their faces. In their view, any Tier 4 alchemist could pass the fourth level, which meant that Meng Hao hadn't accomplished anything unusual. At the most, he had done something special on the first level only. However, before the discussions could finish, a beam of light suddenly shot out from the fifth level. It flew into the air and then began to ripple out. Shockingly, within those ripples appeared a screen. Meng Hao was visible within the screen, walking up a staircase into the fifth level. This scene caused the surrounding 100,000 spectators to stare in shock. Even the 3 Tier 8 elders were astonished. The screen was so huge it seemed to fill the sky. There were many people in the Tao of Alchemy division who hadn't come to the medicine pavilion but, after catching sight of the huge screen, were suddenly curious and began to head over at top speed. One of them was the old woman, the Tier 7 alchemist who had disrupted Meng Hao's lectures. Shocked, she flew in from the outer mountains. Everyone around the medicine pavilion began to discuss the unprecedented appearance of the screen. They were all very excited. What's going on? I've never heard of a screen appearing when people entered the medicine pavilion. Could it be that this is a new divine ability, manifested by the medicine pavilion now that the rules have been changed? Ha, this is great. We'll be able to clearly see how Fang Hao passes through the fifth level. This is much better than before. The 3 Tier 8 elders stared in shock, and then exchanged suspicious glances. It was strictly prohibited to reveal what happened inside the medicine pavilion. Even though some people might secretly find out some details, they would keep things low-key and not spread the information around. That was especially true of the fifth level and higher. Pill Elder is in control of the medicine pavilion. Could it be that he has some secret plan? Even as the 3 old men transmitted a discussion, everything around them went quiet. On the screen, it was possible to see Meng Hao, who had just stepped foot off of the stairs and onto the fifth level. At the same time, on the stone stele located outside of the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao's name appeared on the fourth level, yet again first on the list. Chapter 914, First in Level After Level. Chapter 915, Striving for the Pinnacle of Perfection. In the instant that he entered the fifth level, Meng Hao stopped in his tracks and looked around. Then he took a deep breath, and his eyes began to shine with a brilliant light. He began to tremble, a trembling that originated from the excitement in his heart and seemed very difficult to control. Meng Hao would never act like this in a life-or-death battle, but this was an examination, a test of his skill with plants and vegetation. He truly wished to know the extent of his skill. Therefore, he wanted the examination to get harder and for there to be more medicinal plants involved. As of this moment, what he saw was an enormous fifth level, filled with glittering lights and seemingly infinite medicinal ingredients. There were plants of all kinds and types, and even some things that bore the semblance of wild animals. From the look of it, this level had 10 times as many items as the previous level. 1 billion, Meng Hao thought, his eyes shining as he looked around. As of this moment, he now had a much deeper understanding of the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy. These 1 billion medicinal ingredients were essentially anything that could be counted as medicinal that had appeared in the Ninth Mountain and see throughout tens of thousands of years of history. These items weren't just limited to plants and vegetation. They were not grafted plants either. Everything was whole. Meng Hao glanced over them and saw tens of thousands of items that he didn't recognize. He began to breathe heavily. These 1 billion medicinal resources suddenly superimposed over each other in front of Meng Hao to transform into an enormous ancient tome that was as tall as a person. Yet again, it was the classic of plants and vegetation. However, underneath the title of the book were the words, Volume 1. This must be the full first volume of the classic of plants and vegetation, thought Meng Hao, his heart pounding. 1 billion medicinal plants. The Fang clan's Tao of alchemy truly is boundless and profound. The crowds in the outside world were equally shocked. More and more cultivators were showing up, and when they saw the image on the screen, their jaws dropped. Is that the fifth level? 1 billion medicinal plants. The only way to ever be promoted to a Tier 5 alchemist is to pass this level. Any Tier 5 alchemist in the Tao of Alchemy division is incredibly famous and powerful in the outside world. As the buzz of conversation filled the air outside, an archaic voice could be heard filling the fifth level. 1 billion medicinal plants. Identify the first 100 million in the classic of plants and vegetation to pass this level. One mistake means failure. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with a bright light. Expression solemn, he slowly walked forward. As far as he was concerned, this was the first time the test had actually seemed difficult. Even his first cursory scan confirmed that there were tens of thousands of items that he wasn't familiar with. One mistake in those first 100 million, and he would fail. It seems I've underestimated the Fang clan's Tao of alchemy, he thought. Expression serious, he reached out, placed his hand on the ancient book, and sent his divine sense into it. Immediately, countless medicinal plants appeared within his divine sense, which he immediately began to imprint. The pages of the ancient book began to flip at high speed. In the blink of an eye, several thousand pages had already been turned over. None of the observers had ever seen anything like this before. Now, though, the scene was playing out right in front of them, clearly visible on the screen. Tens of thousands of observers on the outside looked on in shock. Deathly silence filled the air, and all minds reeled as they watched Meng Hao and the ancient book. The apprentice alchemist's eyes went wide, and as for the full alchemists, they began to pant. Even the Tier 5, 6, and 7 alchemists were stunned. The 3 Tier 8 elders gasped. The scene playing out left even them truly amazed. They even began to wonder whether they could make the tome's pages flip so quickly. From the look of things, Meng Hao was simply a natural-born genius when it came to plants and vegetation. Just how familiar is he with plants and vegetation? He doesn't even need to think. He recognizes them the instant he looks at them. His foundation in plants and vegetation really is terrifying. With whom did he study the Tao of alchemy to lay such a foundation? This is unbelievable. As the audience's reaction swelled into an uproar, Meng Hao was inside, concentrating solely on the contents of the classic of plants and vegetation. Time passed, and he identified more and more of the tome's contents, faster and faster. 10 million, 30 million, 50 million. It didn't take long before he had identified 90 million. The spectators observed with rapt attention. It was at this point that, all of a sudden, Meng Hao stopped turning the pages of the ancient book. There on the page in front of him, a heart had appeared. It was a wooden heart, parched and cracked. A few tiny flowers could be seen growing out of it, and when Meng Hao saw it, he stood there quietly. The alchemists in the world outside were watching the screen closely. Some of the Tier 5 alchemists looked at the wooden heart, then frowned and began to rack their brains to try and identify it. Some of the Tier 6 alchemists hesitated and were unable to determine with certainty exactly what it was. Even the old woman who had stolen Meng Hao's business looked on with flickering thoughtfulness. Only the 3 Tier 8 alchemists didn't seem fazed. They exchanged glances and began to transmit a conversation. Fang Hao really got unlucky. In the 5th level, there are 10 types of medicinal plants that have long since become extinct. They are plants no outsider would ever know about. Even we didn't find out about them until we reached Tier 8. He definitely won't be able to identify the woodbear heart. The test is over. What a pity. However, he can try again in a month. Considering the momentum he built up before, as long as he doesn't run into a medicine plant he's never seen before, he shouldn't have much of a problem passing the 5th level. Although I find it strange that this particular medicinal plant would appear in the first 100 million, yet there it is. The 3 old men were then lost in thought and didn't converse any further. Back on the 5th level, Meng Hao looked at the image in front of him, muttering. He didn't recognize the item and in fact had never seen it before. At first glance, if you didn't know it was wood, you would probably think it was an actual heart. Meng Hao extended his right hand and pointed at the page. Immediately, glittering light rose up, and an illusory version of the wooden heart appeared in front of him, then rapidly grew very clear. He could even sense a faint medicinal aroma emanating out. After inhaling deeply, he closed his eyes and began to make some mental deductions. Although he didn't recognize this wooden heart, he was still able to use his skill with plants and vegetation to analyze its medicinal properties. After enough time passed for half an incense stick to burn, Meng Hao's eyes snapped open, and he began to make an imprint with divine sense. Effective against chills that enter the body, is filled with rich spiritual energy and the power of fire and wood, contains 9,137 variations, can be grown using spirit extract, and when it reaches maturity, it contains the potential to materialize immortal qi. And using it to concoct medicinal pills for the immortal realm, depending on which variations are used, and which of those is the main ingredient then, regardless of which medicinal pill is created, as long as you add apifever flower, its medicinal strength can be increased by 10%. Meng Hao quickly finished imprinting the information. Although he didn't know the exact name of this medicinal item, the name wasn't actually important. After finishing the imprint of information, the wooden heart vanished from the page, to be replaced by a block of text that thoroughly described the plant's properties and growth characteristics. The description was incredibly detailed, including information about medicinal effects, details vital to using the ingredient to concoct medicinal pills, descriptions about how to harvest it, and other information. When Meng Hao saw all the information, he took a deep breath. Although he had determined many correct bits of information about the wooden heart, his information had not been as detailed as the final description. He quickly committed the information to memory. Then he waved his hand and continued to flip through the pages. When the spectators saw what had happened, they were shocked. Even the 3-tier 8 elders gasped and stared with wide, astonished eyes. He most likely has never seen that wood-bear heart before, and yet he just smelled it a few times and then was able to explain its medicinal properties. What an incredible Tao of alchemy! What profound skill with plants and vegetation! Deep within the Tao of Alchemy division was a mountain that was considered to be a sacred location. This was where Fang Danian resided, the Tao of Alchemy division's only Tier 9 alchemist. He had a full head of white hair, and as he sat there cross-legged on the mountain peak, his eyes slowly opened. He then gazed in the direction of the medicine pavilion, his eyes shining with a gleam of curiosity. I wonder which grandmaster of the Tao of Alchemy trained a disciple like this. His skill with plants and vegetation has already reached incredible heights. He came from planet South Heaven. I haven't ever heard of any grandmaster on planet South Heaven who could develop such a talented pupil. The old man sighed. Although planet South Heaven is shrouded in mystery, it's possible this kid has had some unique opportunities. He continued to look at the medicine pavilion in silence. Back on the 5th level, Meng Hao continued to rapidly flip through the tome's pages. They moved so fast that the entire book seemed like one connected piece. Soon, he had completely imprinted 10% of the 1 billion items inside. However, Meng Hao didn't stop there. His mind was completely absorbed in the book, to the extent that he forgot his original reason for drawing everyone's attention to him here. Gradually, the 10% became 20, then 30. After completing 50%, his speed gradually slowed. He would occasionally encounter medicinal plants that he didn't recognize, but in those cases, he actually got excited. He wanted to see more medicinal plants that he had never seen before. That was the only way for him to experience the sensation of groping for the correct answer. That was when he could truly unleash his skill with plants and vegetation, analyzing the item from various angles and using his best judgment to determine, not necessarily the name, but rather, enough information to imprint it with divine sense. When the full description appeared, he would commit it to memory. He was now getting the feeling that attempting to pass through the medicine pavilion was really helping him to learn a lot more about plants and vegetation. Meng Hao's skill with plants and vegetation had reached an incredible level. By now, there were few types of plants or vegetation within the 9th mountain, and see that he was unaware of. Every single new one that he encountered pushed his skill to an even more refined extent. 60%, 70%, 80%. Meng Hao wasn't aware of how much time had passed. However, the closer he got to the end of the book, the more medicinal plants he encountered that he was unfamiliar with, which required even more time. And yet, his excitement only grew. Outside of the medicine pavilion, there were now nearly 200,000 cultivators clustered around, watching the screen with blank expressions. The excitement on Meng Hao's face was clear, and the more medicinal plants he identified, the more everyone's minds reeled. Inhuman, When it comes to plants and vegetation, this Fang Hao is a beast. Don't tell me he was actually a medicinal plant in a past life. Otherwise, how else could he be so inhuman? The fifth level has 1 billion medicinal plants, and from the way he's going, it looks like he's going to identify them all. I just realized something. The merit points I paid to hear him lecture about plants and vegetation were worth it. Definitely worth it. Chapter 916, Lotuses with Each Step. As time passed, a few people noticed that under normal circumstances, the fifth level would have already concluded. However, Meng Hao was still plugging away. Apparently, the time limit had been cancelled, leaving Meng Hao free to spend as much time as he wanted there. Slowly, the number of plants and vegetation he identified increased. Eventually, 3 days went by. Meng Hao could never have imagined that he would need to spend so much time and energy on the fifth level. His eyes were bloodshot, and he felt that he was on the verge of mental exhaustion. However, he was still excited and his spirits were high. Among the final 20% were many types of the plants and vegetation that Meng Hao didn't recognize. Each one required a great deal of time and energy to analyze and judge before he could identify some clues that would lead him into further levels of investigation. Eventually, he would get enough information to be able to create a divine sense imprint. Detailed introduction on the plant would appear every time he made his imprint. That was what he truly looked forward to. He was like a dried-up sponge, just waiting to absorb boundless knowledge about plants and vegetation. 3 more days passed. None of the audience members left, but instead settled themselves cross-legged in the area. Were these ordinary cultivators, they would probably find the affair boring. However, they were alchemists and apprentice alchemists, people who had devoted their lives to the Tao of alchemy. Watching Meng Hao's examination on the screen enabled them to see medicinal plants that they might otherwise never be able to see, which was an incredible opportunity. Everyone was imprinting the information into their minds, studying and learning. More and more people joined the crowd. On the 10th day, there were nearly 300,000 people present, densely packed together as far as the eye could see. On the 5th level, a tremor ran through Meng Hao's body as he woke up from his reverie of plants and vegetation. There in front of him was the final page of the ancient book. At that moment, all of his exhaustion from the past days enveloped him, and his head felt swollen and began to pulse with pain. To him, these past 10 days left him feeling more worn out than when he had fought the 3 black-robed immortal realm cultivators. And yet he did not close his eyes. He examined the tome, upon which his results for this level were revealed. He hadn't paid any attention to the results for the first 4 levels, because he was absolutely confident that he hadn't made any mistakes. However, on this 5th level, he wasn't so confident. "I missed more than 200, he murmured, all of them in the final 300 million plants. Finally, he closed his eyes and rotated his cultivation base to restore his composure. He wasn't happy with his results at all. However, he had been introduced to many unfamiliar medicinal plants on this level, and his skill with plants and vegetation had increased by a whole level. To the outside audience, the results were completely shocking, and that included the 3 Tier 8 elders. Everyone gasped, and then a huge uproar occurred. 1 billion plants and he only missed a bit over 200. He's definitely inhuman. Any Tier 5 alchemist would pass by identifying the first 100 million, but Fang Hao required more of himself. He went through all 1 billion. From the look on his face, he seems a bit disappointed. The sound of the conversations among the 300,000 audience members was like thunder that spread out in all directions, and was heard by quite a few of the Tao of Alchemy division's apprentice alchemists and full alchemists. The ground trembled and the clouds in the sky shattered. The 3 Tier 8 alchemists wore forced smiles on their faces as they exchanged glances. "When I attempted the 5th level that year, I couldn't have done that. Forget about back then. Even right now, we're probably the only people who could. Even the Tier 7 alchemists probably couldn't pull something like that off." Bright beams of light appeared off in the distance as more Tier 8 alchemists appeared. Of course, no one present could see them. As they arrived, they looked at the medicine pavilion, and their eyes were filled with anticipation. Finally, our Tao of Alchemy division has a truly chosen member of the clan. Back on the 5th level of the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao opened his eyes. Much of his tiredness and exhaustion had vanished. He took a deep breath, rose to his feet and stepped forward toward the ancient tome. Then he clasped hands and bowed deeply. "Many thanks for bestowing me with such kindness," he said softly. Each and every word rose up from the depths of his heart. To cultivators of the Tao of Alchemy, Meng Hao's experience just now was truly like being gifted with an amazing Tao. The tome vanished after Meng Hao bowed, and a flight of stairs appeared up ahead of him. At the same time, his name moved from its previous position up to the 5th level, where, as before, it was now in first place on the list. His expression was somber as he strode forward toward the steps and began to climb up to the 6th level. When he arrived, what he saw absolutely nothing. There were no medicinal plants, there was no tome, there was no mist, there wasn't even any light. There was only complete darkness. Everything seemed empty, as if nothing at all existed there. Meng Hao gaped in shock, and he wasn't the only one. The people outside were also staring at the screen, astonished. The only ones who didn't were the alchemists who had previously been on the 6th level. Their faces were grave as they stared closely at the screen. The Tier 7 old woman looked on, her face grim. Now that she had seen how inhuman he was, she regretted what she had done earlier. She had offended him, but she also knew that there was little she could do about it now, and so she might as well stick to her guns. After all, from her perspective, he might be inhuman, but he couldn't compare to the people who had sought out her help in the clan. The compensation they had provided was incredible. I might not be able to do what he did in the 5th level, she thought to herself, but that doesn't matter. As an alchemist, you don't need to have such breadth and depth of knowledge regarding plants and vegetation. It's enough to be intimately familiar with the ones that you do know. I failed dozens of times at this level before finally passing. There's no way this Fang Hao will succeed on his first try. After all, the 6th level is completely different from the first 5. She smiled coldly. The nearby Tier 5, 6, and 7 alchemists were shaking their heads. All of them had challenged the 6th level of the medicine pavilion, so they knew how difficult it was. This level is a watershed, commented one of the Tier 8 elders, his voice light. The first 5 levels require sufficient knowledge of plants and vegetation. The last 4 levels are completely different, and it only gets harder and harder. On the stone steel outside of the medicine pavilion, hundreds of thousands of names could be seen on the first level. There were only 100,000 on the 2nd level, 50,000 on the 3rd level, 20,000 on the 4th level, and less than 10,000 on the 5th level. As for the 6th level, only 5,000 people had ever passed it. The 7th level had 1,000 names and the 8th level only had a bit more than 200. The last level, the 9th, only had 10. It mustn't be forgotten that those numbers represented the accumulation of all the generations that had existed since the founding of the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division. From this, it was easy to imagine how difficult the medicine pavilion was. Furthermore, whenever anyone passed the 6th level, the first thing that would happen would be that a Tao bell would appear in the sky above the ancestral mansion. No outsider could see that bell, and when it tolled, only the members of the Fang clan on planet East Victory could hear it in their minds. That bell represented true honor and glory. Meng Hao stood on the medicine pavilion's 6th level, looking around at the pitch black around him. Even after sending his divine sense out, he could sense nothing but darkness. After hesitating for a moment, he took a step forward. As soon as his foot landed, he stopped in place and cocked his head. His expression flickered. Just now, he hadn't seen anything within the darkness, but had been able to smell the fragrance of medicinal plants. Some of the aromas were faint, some were dense. They all melded together to fill the entire area and seemed to grow even thicker further on. It was at this point that the archaic voice echoed out through the 6th level. Aroma scrying is one of the realms of skill with plants and vegetation. You may take up to 100 steps. With every step, you will smell the fragrance of different medicinal plants. Determine what each plant is based on its smell and imprint the information into the darkness. One mistake means failure. Meng Hao wasn't the only one who could hear the voice. The audience of more than 300,000 in the outside world could also hear it, and it caused their faces to flicker with expressions of disbelief. How could you possibly provide all the answers? No wonder this 6th level is considered so difficult. Aroma scrying is virtually a legendary realm. I never thought that the test would involve aroma scrying. I heard about this realm when I first became an apprentice alchemist. To think that over all the past tens of thousands of years in the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division, 5,000 or so people have actually passed this level. The outside world was in a huge commotion. Virtually everyone took this test to be excessively difficult. It was in a completely different league than the previous 5 levels. The Tier 7 old woman chuckled coldly. As she thought back to the difficulty of this level, she actually felt frightened. The 7th level is even harder for any alchemist, she whispered to herself. And then there's the hell-like 8th level. Back on the 6th level, Meng Hao began to breathe deeply, allowing the fragrances of countless medicinal plants to enter his nose. Immediately, his mind exploded as images of numerous medicinal plants appeared, each one of which was associated with one of the fragrances he had detected. There were no less than 10,000, but in the blink of an eye, his divine sense swept out, and the images of medicinal plants began to appear in the dark void around him. Furthermore, the outline of an illusory lotus appeared beneath his feet. He took a second step and once again breathed in deeply. A tremor ran through his body, and another 10,000 images appeared around him. A second lotus appeared beneath him. One step after another and another. Meng Hao proceeded forward, and with each step he took, he breathed in deeply. Afterward, numerous medicinal plants would appear around him, causing the pitch-black world to be lit up by what looked like a procession of blazing lanterns. Furthermore, lotuses continued to appear beneath his feet. After taking 69 steps, 69 lotuses had appeared, and he was surrounded by millions of shining medicinal plants. To everyone who was watching, Meng Hao almost looked like a holy being, surrounded by swirling plants, lotuses blooming with each step he took. Lotuses with each step, thought the old woman. Her eyes were wide and she was panting. She well knew how difficult the 6th level was, and also knew that the only way a lotus would appear would be if he correctly identified the fragrance of every single medicinal plant and imprinted it correctly. When she had passed the 6th level, she had only caused 3 lotuses to appear, but Meng Hao, shockingly, created lotuses with each step. She wasn't the only shocked one. All of the alchemists who were familiar with the 6th level were shaken. They watched Meng Hao on the screen, and the image they saw would eternally be imprinted into their minds. It was an unforgettable scene that they would never forget for the rest of their lives. Chapter 917, Climbing Higher. The handful of Tier 8 alchemists in the area were visibly moved. They looked at Meng Hao on the screen, and their eyes shone with both praise and hope. The Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division was not a sect, but rather a division of the clan. All of the alchemists and apprentice alchemists were clan members, and their sense of clan pride and honor was at the core of what had kept the clan from falling into ruin over the ages. Actually, merit points were one of several methods that kept clan members from becoming estranged from the clan. Of course, the Tao of Alchemy division hoped for a truly chosen alchemy cultivator to appear, to arouse interest in the Tao of Alchemy, and to bring glory to the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy division once again. However, despite the passage of many years, although other divisions of the clan had produced chosen, the Tao of Alchemy division had remained a quiet and desolate place. Chosen alchemy cultivators were something that could only be happened upon and never sought out. There were some who had the talent for it, but were not the type who were inclined to study the Tao of Alchemy and instead preferred to focus on cultivation. People like that believed that the road to power would only be obstructed by focusing on other practices. Today, though, these Tier 8 elders finally had a bit of hope. On the 6th level of the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao was taking his 70th step. In that instant, he deeply inhaled the dense odor of plants and vegetation. His nose and brain exploded with soundless rumbling, and a tremor ran through him. All of the blood in his body suddenly began to circulate in reverse. Images of medicinal plants began to float up in his mind, endless varieties of them. This type of aroma scrying did not just test someone's skill with plants and vegetation, it also tested instincts. To be able to know how many types of medicinal plants there were by simply sniffing, without thinking about it too much. This was something that could really only be done by instinct and by being incredibly familiar with all sorts of plants and vegetation. This higher level of skill with plants and vegetation was like the instantaneous formula scrying of the Tao of Alchemy. They were actually 2 branches of the same skill and the same realm. 1. Meng Hao learned instantaneous formula scrying in Chapter 218, and it was mentioned a few times after that in Chapters 244, 252, 253, and 254. The level of difficulty of this 6th level examination was such that the requirement to pass was that the test taker successfully take 20 steps. With each of those steps, 10 or more misjudgments were tolerated before that step would be counted as a failure. The reason for the rules being set in such a fashion was because this level was simply too difficult. Therefore, it was easy to imagine how Meng Hao, who had already taken 70 steps, with lotuses blooming for each step, would be so incredibly shocking to all the alchemists outside who understood how difficult the test was. They could hardly believe their eyes. 71 steps, 72 steps, 73 steps. Meng Hao didn't pause. He kept moving forward, heading further and further in. The aromas of plants and vegetation grew stronger and were filled with even more types. And yet Meng Hao continued to produce lotuses with each step. It wasn't until he reached the 80th step that he finally started to slow down, although to the alchemist watching outside, it still looked fast. 81, 82, 83. With each step he took, the surrounding void of darkness glittered more and more brightly. Botanical lanterns shone with scintillating light, until the entire 6th level now appeared to be brightly lit. Having taken his 90th step, he only had 10 more steps to go. He was now moving even slower, as if these 10 steps were difficult even for him. Each step took a lot more thought, which was clear to the audience. His instincts now felt clouded, and now he needed to spend more time analyzing and deducing each aroma. It was only after painstaking examination that he was finally able to identify all of the medicinal plants. The outside world was filled with silence. 300,000 spectators were all staring at Meng Hao on the screen. Behind him was a path of lotuses, and he was surrounded by endless numbers of botanical lamps. As of this moment, Meng Hao was like an immortal of plants and vegetation. He was the focus of all attention. Even that old woman looked on silently. 91, 92, 93. Each step now took approximately 2 hours. Each time, lotuses would bloom and bright lanterns flickered everywhere. The 95th step took him 6 hours. He stood there motionless within the boundless aroma before he finally imprinted all of the plants and vegetation within it. The 96th step took 20 hours. The 97th took 2 days. By the 98th step, Meng Hao had long since lost track of time. Everyone in the outside world was staring closely at the screen. 5 days later, he stepped forward again, and another lotus bloomed. The 99th step took 10 days, but yet again, a lotus bloomed and the crowds went wild. By now, approximately 400,000 people had gathered in the area. All of them were breathing heavily as they waited for Meng Hao to take the final step. The 100th step. There on the 6th level, Meng Hao's eyes were closed. He had no idea how many steps he had taken. Without even thinking about it, he took another step forward. Rumbling sounds filled his mind and his body trembled. Meng Hao was panting. Every imprint he made forced him to sift through a blur of obfuscating information and required much analysis. More time passed. Everyone in the outside world waited. 3 days, 7 days, 10 days. Finally, 20 days passed. The outside world was abuzz. No one had ever been able to spend so much time testing inside of the medicine pavilion. Meng Hao had already taken nearly 2 months to pass from the 1st level all the way to the 6th. 5 more days passed, when suddenly, all of the innumerable botanical lamps in the 6th level exploded with scintillating light. Beneath Meng Hao's foot appeared the 100th lotus. His eyes opened and his body shook. Blood sprayed from his mouth. This level was so difficult that Meng Hao only passed it by shedding blood, sweat, and tears. The last step had pushed him to the limits of his skill with plants and vegetation, which in the end had enabled him to pass with perfect marks. Up ahead, the innumerable botanical lamps merged together to form a staircase of vines, something that seemed suitable only for a sovereign of plants and vegetation. The 7th level was now open. At the same time, from the view of the outside world, the 6th level began to shine with boundless light. The sky went dim, and all darkness was dispelled. The Tao of Alchemy division was now the focus of all eyes. Meng Hao's name appeared on the stone stele, in the first position on the list of names for the 6th level. The audience was abuzz. He passed the 6th level. Lotuses blossomed with each step. 100 steps, 100 lotuses. Could it be that this Fang Hao is going to bring about a renaissance in the Tao of Alchemy division? Just wait until he's finished here in the medicine pavilion. I'm definitely going to go listen to his lectures on plants and vegetation. Meanwhile, an enormous ancient bell appeared in the air above the Fang clan's ancestral mansion. From the look of it, the bell appeared to have seen the passage of ages. It was engraved with mountains and rivers, and as soon as it appeared, it rang loud and sharp. The sound echoed out through planet East Victory, to the ears of anyone with Fang blood in their veins. Outsiders could not hear, but the Fang clan members could. The Fang clan was shaken. Everyone in the Tao of Alchemy division who was not already at the medicine pavilion was aroused. Sensing the light shining up from the medicine pavilion, many of them immediately flew in that direction. Everyone in the ancestral mansion was equally shaken. First, there was the light shining up from the Tao of Alchemy division, and then there was the bell. All Fang clan members were shocked, and many flew toward the Tao of Alchemy division to see what exactly was going on. The Grand Elder stood silently in the main temple, his expression complex and even somewhat confused. "Did I make a mistake?" he murmured. "No, I didn't. Everything is for the clan. Everything I have done is according to the rules of the clan." The Grand Elder took a deep breath, but he still seemed to be at a loss. He looked over at the Tao of Alchemy division, and a fierce glint could be seen in his eyes. Meng Hao sat cross-legged on the 6th level of the medicine pavilion. After meditating for a period of time, he opened his eyes, which were still slightly bloodshot. "From the difficulty of the 5th and 6th levels, I can see the boundlessness of the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy," he murmured. "I made a lot of mistakes on the 5th level, and the 6th level was actually even harder. It's only because I absorbed the resurrection lily that I can have such instincts with plants and vegetation. Therefore, my ability with aroma scrying is actually a bit of a cheap trick. This 7th level will definitely be even harder than all the others." With that, he stood up, and his eyes flashed with a glimmer of obsession. When he had started in the medicine pavilion, his goal had been to amaze the world and become an overnight celebrity. It had all been for the merit points. Now, however, he was doing it to improve his skill with plants and vegetation. He wasn't just concerned with passing the level. He wanted to pass every level at the pinnacle. That was the only way for him to increase his skill with plants and vegetation. He took a deep breath and began to walk up the stairs. At the same time that he set foot on the 7th level, all of the hundreds of thousands of spectators outside were looking on. Compared to the 6th level, the 7th level didn't seem very extraordinary. The only things that were visible were two enormous books. One of them was, of course, the first volume of the Classic of Plants and Vegetation, with its 1 billion medicinal plants. The second was empty. It apparently had no content whatsoever. Even as Meng Hao laid eyes on the two books, the archaic voice rang out through the 7th level. "Using grafting techniques and your knowledge of the mutual augmentation and suppression between different types of plants and vegetation, you must create 10,000 unique medicinal plants. That is the threshold to pass this level. If you wish to pass the level with perfect marks, you must create 100,000. Meng Hao's heart trembled. He took a deep breath, and his eyes began to shine with bright light. Finally, a level like this. He knew that having accumulated so much knowledge regarding plants and vegetation, the time had eventually come to step into a new realm. It was a realm which used the principles of mutual augmentation and suppression, along with grafting techniques, to create medicinal plants that belonged to him and him alone. Using medicinal plants like that to concoct pills would make it very difficult for others to identify the pill formula. Even if they could, it would still be very difficult to create the necessary medicinal plant ingredients. This was also a higher realm of pill concocting. Back when Meng Hao was in the Violet Fate sect, he had encountered such things, but not very often. The ancient demon immortal sect's Tao of Alchemy also touched on such matters, but he had never had a chance to systematically study it. Now he settled his chi and calmed his mind, then stepped forward toward the tome and closed his eyes to think. All of the people in the outside world who had never heard of what the 7th level was like, now gasped. Actually, according to the requirements of the Fang clan's Tao of Alchemy, alchemists began to explore grafting techniques beginning in Tier 5. In order to become a Tier 7 alchemist, it was necessary to create 10,000 personally grafted medicinal plants. Among the hundreds of thousands of spectators, the Tier 6 and 7 alchemists all began to whisper among themselves. "I wonder if Meng Hao will be able to pass the 7th level. How many kinds of grafted medicinal plants will he create? It's going to be difficult for him to pass. No one has ever done so on the first try. Not even His Excellency Pill Elder was able to. It took him 4 tries. Only with a profound knowledge base and significant experience with grafting plants and vegetation can someone even attempt the 7th level, let alone pass it." Chapter 918, Boundless Tao of Alchemy. On the 7th level of the medicine pavilion, Meng Hao stood in front of the tomes for the time it takes an incense stick to burn, thinking. Then, his eyes opened, and he waved his hand, causing the Classic of Plants and Vegetation to rapidly flip open to a certain page. Instantly, a medicinal plant appeared and floated up into the air. More pages flipped in quick succession, 9 of them, and 9 more medicinal plants appeared. Meng Hao made a grasping motion, causing all 9 plants to appear on the blank tome's first empty page. Next, the plants followed his line of thought. Some were stripped of their bark, others had flowers removed. In the end, they formed together within Meng Hao's divine sense, where he used the techniques of mutual augmentation and suppression to graft them together. The medicinal plant on the first page glittered brightly, whereupon the book seemed to analyze and judge it. After the blink of an eye, the page slowly turned, indicating that Meng Hao had successfully created his first medicinal plant. He once again waved his left hand over the classic of plants and vegetation, pulling out more medicinal plants, and using his divine sense to transform and graft them together, continuing to create different medicinal plants according to his desires. Time passed. To cultivators who didn't understand the Tao of alchemy, this examination seemed somewhat boring. However, to the cultivators of the Tao of Alchemy division, it was an unprecedented opportunity for good fortune. Even the Tier 7 alchemists looked on with strange lights glowing in their eyes. As Meng Hao created his medicinal plants, they gained more enlightenment and were continuously shocked. In fact, their own skill with plants and vegetation was slowly creeping upward. I can't believe that you can make cold-type plants that way. After adding 9 hot elements, the original formula was to add 1 cold element. But instead, he added 9 cold elements. According to the law of mutual augmentation and suppression, you would think that the result would be neutral. And yet, the result is like that. That moonspirit flower can actually turn into sunsplendor leaf through grafting. What an outrageous line of thinking, and yet it works. Even the old woman stared with wide eyes. Subconsciously, she began to imitate Meng Hao, and her own skill with plants and vegetation gradually began to increase. The Tier 5 and 6 alchemists were incredibly excited. When it came to plant and vegetation grafting, they were just in the initial stages of learning. As they watched Meng Hao at work, they committed everything they saw to memory. To them, this was an extremely rare opportunity. As for the lower-level alchemists, this was a realm far removed from them. However, they all understood that if they wanted to travel far along the path of the Tao of alchemy, then they would eventually have to learn how to graft plants and vegetation. Therefore, they also did as much as they could to take advantage of the situation. The apprentice alchemists were even less clear about what was happening. However, seeing the intent expressions on the faces of the higher-level alchemists, they also realized that what Meng Hao was currently doing with grafting techniques was astonishing. Therefore, they kept their eyes glued on Meng Hao and did their best to try to remember what sort of grafting techniques he used. The world outside the medicine pavilion was completely quiet. Even the 2 old men who stood guard outside had opened their eyes and were looking at the screen up in midair. The Tier 8 alchemists stood there silently, watching Meng Hao and observing his grafting techniques. All of them were filled with anticipation. Meng Hao once again lost track of time as he absorbed himself in the grafting of plants and vegetation. His left hand sped over the first volume of the classic of plants and vegetation, seemingly flipping pages non-stop. Time passed. Meng Hao created more and more medicinal plants, 10, 100, 1,000. 7 days later, Meng Hao finally created 10,000 medicinal plants. He took a deep breath, but he wasn't finished. Instead, he focused inwardly for a moment, experiencing a similar feeling regarding plants and vegetation to that which he felt when practicing cultivation. He could clearly tell that as he created more medicinal plants, his understanding of plants and vegetation grew more refined. Although it had been a long time since he had concocted medicinal pills, he could also sense that his pill concocting skill was becoming stronger. My hand is the pill furnace, and I will blend all heaven and earth together in my palm to create an almighty medicinal pill. His eyes shone with a light that originated from his Tao, with his Tao of alchemy. With this Tao, he could corroborate his heart, and then use that heart to concoct pills. 7 more days passed. By now, Meng Hao had created more than 15,000 medicinal plants. Everyone outside was shaken, and their admiration for Meng Hao had reached the pinnacle. Even the old woman had to ask herself whether her own skill with plants and vegetation was equal to Meng Hao's. In the end, she had to sigh and admit that people like Meng Hao were exactly what the Tao of Alchemy division lacked, and in fact, desperately needed. As for her, if she continued to comply with the wishes of those in the main clan who wanted her to target Meng Hao, perhaps she would fall out of harmony with the Tao of alchemy itself. Forget it, she thought, her eyes shining with determination. After all, I am a member of the Tao of Alchemy Division. She took a deep breath and dispelled all thoughts of targeting Meng Hao. All of a sudden, it felt as if a great weight had been lifted off of her. She focused on the screen and on contemplating plants and vegetation. 15,000, 20,000, 30,000. A month passed by, during which time Meng Hao created 30,000 medicinal plants. More people gathered outside. By now, there were over 500,000 spread out in all directions. Everyone was watching Meng Hao create medicinal plants. Occasionally, people seemed to go wild with joy at what they were seeing, and at other times they looked confused. However, in the end, everyone watching was able to gain something. Unfortunately, Meng Hao was completely absorbed in what he was doing and had no idea what was going on outside. If he did know, he might well have gone nuts. After all, this was a prime opportunity to charge merit points. If at this moment he stepped out of the medicine pavilion and bellowed out that he demanded payment, virtually everyone in the audience would instantly pay what he asked. From the moment he had entered the first level until now, a full 4 months had passed. Although cultivators had a long lifespan, and often a single meditation session might last years, to them, 4 months would still seem to pass by slowly if they weren't meditating. Despite that, no one grew impatient. Instead, they continued to make gains by watching. Meng Hao immersed himself in grafting, and he was happy. There was no other place like this medicine pavilion, with 1 billion medicinal plants inside that he could choose from. Although they were all illusory, that didn't matter to Meng Hao. They could still help him advance to a higher level in his skill with plants and vegetation. Another month passed, and Meng Hao's eyes were bloodshot. He had now created 50,000 medicinal plants. In the beginning, it had been relatively simple. However, the further along he progressed, the more difficult it became. Were he content to do a perfunctory job, this level would have been simple. However, he placed high requirements on himself. The medicinal plants he was creating now all were composed of at least 100 other medicinal plants. In fact, the past 10,000 he had created were grafted from at least 500 other medicinal plants. Exhaustion swelled up within him. The 5th, 6th, and 7th levels had all been quite a mental strain on him. In fact, as a result, he had even unwittingly grown a great deal in terms of divine sense. Even more amazing to Meng Hao was that, over the past months, his cultivation base was nearing 90% of the power of a true immortal. As the 6th month arrived, Meng Hao trembled. His mental energy was almost completely depleted, and his head felt as if it were swollen. Piercing pain occasionally stabbed through his temples, and even his thinking had slowed. However, he had now created nearly 70,000 medicinal plants. Not a single one was a repeat, and any of them that appeared in the outside world would certainly cause a huge stir. That was especially true of the last 5,000. Each one of those contained more than 1,000 different grafting elements. Medicinal plants like that could be refined into a pill, just by adding a few minor ingredients. The spectators outside were entranced and deeply moved by Meng Hao's skill with plants and vegetation. Another half a month passed. Finally, Meng Hao's energy was spent. His face was ashen, and he seemed to be on the verge of collapsing. Even his eternal stratum couldn't keep up with the mental strain. He let out a long sigh and finally ceased working. He had created over 75,000 plants. My mind isn't up to the task, he thought. If I keep going, I might injure my foundation. Most important of all, my mastery of plants and vegetation isn't good enough, at least not in terms of grafting. I think perhaps 10,000 more would be my absolute limit. Furthermore, considering my current skill with plants and vegetation, creating an almighty medicinal plant composed of 10,000 grafts would be too difficult. He took a deep breath and then slowly rose to his feet, his eyes shining with a gleam of obsession. I must deeply study the Fang clan's way with plants and vegetation. With that, he turned and vanished. When he reappeared, he was outside the medicine pavilion. When he saw the packed crowd of 500,000 cultivators, he gaped in shock. Although he had assumed some people would come to observe, he had never imagined that so many people would show up. He even saw that all sorts of full alchemists were present, many of them still not fully awakened from the reveries of enlightenment they had fallen into while watching Meng Hao. He was too tired to say anything. The only thing he wanted to do was return to his immortal's cave and rest for a few days. He immediately flew into the air, transforming into a beam of light that shot off into the distance. As soon as he flew into the air, the crowds began to come to their senses. They looked at Meng Hao making his way off into the distance, and then went completely crazy. "That was Fang Hao," someone shouted. "He came out." More people came to their senses, and when they realized that the screen was gone, they understood that Meng Hao had already emerged from the medicine pavilion. 75,000 medicinal plants, huh? He's a grandmaster of plants and vegetation. He fully deserves to be called an apothecary. With Grandmaster Fang Hao's skill in plants and vegetation, if he wanted to simply pass through the medicine pavilion, I wouldn't dare to say he could pass the 9th level, but the 8th level would definitely be no problem. Everyone was in a tumult as they watched Meng Hao leave. Their eyes shone with fanaticism and reverence. In the world of cultivation, the strong are respected, and it was no different in the Tao of Alchemy division. He stopped on purpose this time, but in a few months, he'll definitely keep going. The surrounding alchemists watched Meng Hao leave, and they all sighed emotionally. This was especially true of the Tier 8 elders, whose faces were filled with hope and excitement. Deep in the inner mountains, Pill Elder Fang Danyan had been watching Meng Hao the entire time. Finally he sighed, and a smile appeared on his face. There is finally a successor for the Tao of Alchemy division. He waved his right hand, within which appeared an ancient book, upon which were written the words, "Classic of Plants and Vegetation." "Give this to Fang Hao," he said softly, waving his hand again. A mysterious light appeared, covering over the book and taking it away. Meng Hao flew out of the Tao of Alchemy division, not even fully aware of his surroundings. However, a moment later he suddenly stopped in place, and his eyes went wide. His mind felt as if it had just been struck by lightning. Damn it, how could I have forgotten to charge merit points? There were more than 500,000 people there just now. How many months was I in the medicine pavilion? This.